Wonderful. Okay, well, it's right at the hour, a couple minutes after. So I think we have just about everybody on. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And I will turn it over to Marie, and she's going to tell us a little bit, but we're so happy that you're here. This is going to be a great workshop. It's been a lot of thought put into this and wonderful guest speakers to help you understand the content better. So thank you, everybody, for joining.
Hi, everybody. I'm probably going to be in and out because I've got a bad cough right now. And so I'll go on mute and go off picture for a little while. But I want to thank everyone for attending this first workshop of the year. We're hopeful that we can have maybe 3 workshops this year, like this one, where we will do them over a couple of mornings. Feel free to ask questions and use the chat. Cindy is going to put in the chat later on tomorrow. She's going to put the link to the survey. We would really love it if you would take the survey and give us the feedback on this and any other suggestions you have about how we can make our workshops better. I can't go away from this without plugging, of course, Spring Symposium. We have 2.5 days of good content for Spring Symposium. It's going to be a lot around technology and also around human resources. And how do we address the attrition problem, the great resignation, the people who are coming to training and then not taking the job, and all of those complexities that we're facing in the staffing situation today. So I want to thank all of our companies who have participated: Premier Response, RQA, McMurray & Schuster, Michelle Wright's company, Doug's company, SQX. This is going to be a lot of content. We're going to start off. I'm going to just switch over. I'm going to have the PowerPoint and I'll drive this. So I'm going to switch over and share screen.
Buckle in, everybody.
Buckle in.
Here we go.
So let me minimize that. All right. So this is the first workshop of the year, as I mentioned. This is what we'll be covering over today. Day 1 is Foundation by Kim Daniels. We're going to have a little opportunity for some of you to tell us about what some of your challenges have been, with a few minutes for stories from the trenches. What have you had to face? What kind of recalls? What kind of product crises? What kind of high volume incidents that might be good incidents, but created a crisis for you to manage through? What outsourcers bring to the table with Beth Ziff from Premier Response. We're going to talk a little bit about electronic compensation with Doug Persley. Michelle Schuster from McMurray & Schuster is going to talk to us about a unique type of crisis, and that's a data breach. In this day when we're taking so many credit cards on the phone and so much work has shifted to electronic, data breaches are becoming more and more prevalent. And then Michelle Wright from the Dark Art of Food Labeling is going to talk to us about truthful and misleading claims. And then we'll leave just a few minutes at the end of today for any questions you might have. Each presenter is also going to have, the opportunity to take questions as well. So just, keep that in mind. Also, we are taping this and recording it, and we will make the decks available afterwards. So you can take some good notes if you want to, but know that the decks will be available. Excuse me. Going on to tomorrow, we're going to start with elevating the quality of the crisis plan and doing risk assessment with Melanie Whitman. We'll take a little quick break. And then we have a big segment from Gene Grabowski. Some of you may know him from GMA on crisis communications. Kevin Platt from RQA is going to discuss retrieval and market execution. And then Melanie is going to come back and join us again for a discussion on the importance of culture and training and being prepared. A lot of the crises that we face can go away if we have good preparation. And that's what this workshop is all about. It's no longer if you're going to have a crisis, it's more like when. So this workshop, we hope will prepare you for the inevitable. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kim Daniels from RQA. And Kim, take it away.
Perfect. Great. So good morning, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. So as Marie mentioned, my name is Kim Daniels. I am the Associate Director of Crisis and Risk Management working for the RQA team. A little bit of background about me. I have been in the consumer care, quality, crisis and risk management space for approximately 20 years. I started my career at Wrigley's Chewing Gum, helping the Corporate Quality Assurance Laboratory become certified to an ISO 9001 standard for the laboratory. And then I began analyzing and reviewing consumer complaints for chewing gum. Again, this is back in my college days. I transitioned then to a career at a company called Diageo, which is a large global beverage alcohol company. And I worked there for many years, heading up their consumer care program, developing it for North America. It's currently still the benchmark for the organization. I also then supported the development of call center program in Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil. And then for approximately 7 years, I was responsible for quality excellence for North America, which means I managed and had responsibilities for design quality, supplier quality, manufacturing quality, and consumer and customer quality or consumer care. So during my time in that space, I managed my share of product withdrawals, recalls, and I actually was a part of the crisis management team and was specifically the crisis management lead when there were market withdrawals and recall. So I have experience, a great deal of experience. Ironically enough, RQA was my phone a friend when I was in role at Diageo. Typically, it was a call on a Friday evening saying, I need some help retrieving product from market or remediating product in the field. Great deal of partnership with the RQA team. Fast forward to where we are today. I've been with RQA since 2018, and I have been helping clients, both food and non-food consumer products, with preparing for recalls, being proactive with crisis management training, and taking teams through simulations. And I also sit on the team that manages incident responses that come through from our insured clients. So just wanted to say, again, a big hello. I wanted to provide some context regarding my background. And then without further ado, let's get started. All right, so the objectives of having a crisis management plan are really just for organizations to quickly achieve control. As we all know, when there is a crisis, things can rapidly spin out of control, as you see this sinking ship here. So it's important to have a documented crisis management plan to help organizations rapidly achieve control. It's also a good a demonstration of corporate commitments to the organization, and it provides framework for leaders of the organization to understand what their roles are and what they need to do during a crisis. It helps control the accuracy and distribution of information. And as you all know, in your roles of consumer care, information flies quickly, and sometimes information is inaccurate. So having a documented crisis management plan really helps provide information and templates and process flows for how to properly do that. The crisis management plan also contains lists of both internal and external resources that organizations could be using and should be using during the various crises, whether it be a recall, a fire, a flood, an injury or an injury that occurs at a plant. Again, various resources that are available. It helps organizations take a step back and really contemplate and review the types of crises that could occur within their business, whether it be at a plant or at one of their corporate offices. And by taking a step back to identify what those crisis risks or the crisis types are, it helps organizations develop plans to respond to those crises and then prepare continuity plans. And then it also helps to put plans in place to eliminate or reduce the impact of a particular crisis. So on to the next slide, we will be transitioning, continuing on. Yep, perfectly, Marie, thank you. So by having a documented crisis management plan that's typically tested on an annual basis, maybe more frequently in the events there's a situation that prompted a refresh, but it allows companies to work with their local emergency responders as they're going through simulation exercises so that everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities are, and they could rapidly respond to crisis. It helps organizations attend to those who need help in a timely and efficient manner, whether it be employees or consumers. It protects the company's reputation and, of course, financial. And then it provides guidelines for timely and accurate distribution of data when needed. Okay, on to the next slide. Perfect. Let's see. All right, so crisis management. So why is it important? So as you know, in addition to doing the right thing, having a crisis management plan in place is important because it's the right thing to do, and it provides the foundation and framework for organizations and leaders to do the right thing and to rapidly respond to protect the business, protect consumers, protect the environments. In addition to that, just doing the right thing, news spreads quickly like wildfire. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. So as you can see for this slide in the middle, the statistics are from 2016 and 2017. The one in social media back in 2016 and 2017, in Facebook, they had 1.8 billion users. As of end of last year, Facebook has 2.8 billion users. For Instagram, let me just take a look here. Instagram had 600 million. In 2021, Instagram has 200 billion. And for LinkedIn, again, these are just some examples, some statistics. They had 429 million following on LinkedIn, and now there's 756 million followers on social media. Again, the good news, the bad news, it all spreads fast. So it's important for organizations to have a plan in place and be able to test it and train folks. So as you can see, there are some examples, again, headlines in the news over many years. So Tylenol being one of them, which was handled, again, a very unfortunate event, but it was handled seamlessly. The BP oil spill event that occurred in 2010, and then the peanut butter recall. Again, the two latter crises, much more work that could have been done to better prepare and respond to a crisis. So the next slide, please. The next slide just demonstrates that, let's see, perfect, one more up, that, yeah, great, perfect, Marie, that crises happen all the time. As Marie mentioned, it's not if, it's actually just when. So organizations need to be on the ready and prepared, have plans in place, and tested with folks trained to be ready, because unfortunately it's going to happen. I just pulled some of the news headlines over the last many weeks, from a food company. The team is going through an infant product recall right now. And a couple of weeks ago, there was a fire at a Walmart at a distribution center just down the street from where I live in Plainfield, Illinois. And just the other day, I received a recall in the news for one of the cars that we drive, that the backup camera isn't working and we need to take it in for replacement. So whether it be a recall for a food or a consumer product, a fire, an explosion, a flood, a chemical spill, these things happen, they're real. So organizations really need to be on the ready. So transitioning to the next slide, I was given the heads up that the SOCAP organization, the team members here, love crisis, love case studies. So I wanted to share with the team just a case study that I'm sure you've all heard of, that have been in the news back in the 80s, and this is the Tylenol crisis. And instead of sharing what didn't go right with the BP's oil spill, I want to share with you what did go right with Tylenol and the crisis that they managed many years ago. I want to leave you with information about how you can strengthen your programs, and then in consumer care, things that you should be considering as you have some takeaways from this session. So for Tylenol, as you know, back in 1982, 83, Tylenol was laced with cyanide, and unfortunately, consumers were killed. What Tylenol did, the folks at J&J did, was they immediately alerted consumers to discontinue use of consuming that product. they went on the news satellites and had several press conferences outlining what was occurring. They rapidly implemented an 800 number for consumers and for their customers, and they fielded over 30,000 calls between October and November. So as the team is in consumer care roles that are on this call today, that's one of the things I want you to be thinking about is in the event there was a problem, whether it be a recall, something where there was an explosion, how would you rapidly ramp up and be able to handle an influx of calls, whether it be from your consumers or customers, or even from your employees? So the other thing that Tylenol team managed well was they temporarily ceased all production of those capsules. They worked arm in arm collaboratively with law enforcement agencies, professionals, health professionals nationwide, and the Food and Drug Administration to collaborate and figure out how do we mitigate this issue and how do we prevent this from happening again. They work very closely with these agencies. They replaced the tamper-resistant capsules with caplets, and they came up with a triple safety seal within 6 months of this occurring. They also offered new pricing and advertisements, and they offered discounts up to 25%. And their field team, they had an extensive field sales force with boots on the ground that made presentations to medical stakeholders about what they were going to do and what was going to be done differently and how they can have confidence in the brand moving forward. So the next slide talks about the actions that they took. So they accepted their role in the crisis. They did say that we should have done a better job, and they pledged that they are going to do different. They are going to take different steps moving forward to protect the health and safety of consumers. And they obtained forgiveness from their stakeholders. Although they did articulate that it was an unfair attack by an outside person, they also said that no matter what, it's important that we protect the health of the consumers. And no matter what, we're accepting to accept the losses of our organization. And again, they did the right thing. They offered remediation and compensation for families and counseling and financial assistance. They took action to fix the problem rapidly. So they came up with a triple seal to protect that packaging. And then many years later, there was passed into law requirements for companies to put safety seals on product to prevent this type of thing from happening in the future. And then from a leadership perspective, they were very clear, they were quick, they were timely, and they had a consistent message that was being modeled and provided by their CEO on a regular basis. If you Google Tylenol, it talks about this company having just a model crisis management process in place. It was a horrible situation that occurred, but the way that they handled it seamlessly. And then the next slide is, what are the learnings? So what do they learn from this? So they showed that no matter what, they're not going to risk public health of consumers at any cost, no matter what. It demonstrated that J&J, all the way to the top, that their leadership was providing consistent messages and they can be trusted all the way to the head of the organization. Like I mentioned, they set a standard for new protection for protecting consumers with safety seals on products. They reacted quickly. Interesting here on the consumer care front, they reported their own bad news. They didn't wait for reporters. Back in the 80s, they didn't have social media like we do today. But they didn't wait for the reporters on the news channels to say what was happening. They reported their own bad news rapidly, real time, as it was occurring. And they spoke with one voice. They disseminated information from a command center, one central location. They were accessible to the media, and they had targeted communications for those folks that were impacted the most by the crisis. So again, if you Google Tylenol crisis management and handling of the situation, it's going to come up as one of the model case studies. If you Google BP and the oil spill, that's going to come up as what not to do. It demonstrated that the organization was slow to respond. There was inconsistent messaging from leadership. They were delayed, and they didn't apologize or take ownership for the crisis of what was occurring. So just again, as you have time after this session and you kind of go back into your day-to-day work, be helpful just to refresh your memory on those two examples again for what to do and what not to do regarding crisis. So on to the next slide here. I just want to share with you, Marie, if you can press one more. Let's see. Let's see here. So I have, would any of the learnings be different if we took this crisis and dropped it into, maybe, Christina, it's something that we can talk about after. Christina said, would any of these learnings be different if we took the crisis and dropped it into this day and age with social media as a factor? So yeah, maybe it's hard to kind of look back, but I just think the fact that social media is, again, growing, the different avenues in which consumers communicates continues to grow day by day, week by week. It's just even more important now that organizations are on the ready. So here I wanted to share with you the stages of a crisis. So just beginning from stage one, which is the initial notification of an incident, whether it be a recall, whether it be, again, a spill, a cybersecurity events, a flood, a consumer was ill, or an employee was injured on the job. Stage one is really receiving notification of the incident. Stage two is assessing. So based upon the chemical spill, for instance, at the plants, what is the risk to employees? What's the risk to the environment? So being able to step back and take a risk assessment of the situation. Stage three is developing a recommendation for how to mitigate. So based upon the assessment of the risk, what is the recommendation to the organization and the leaders of the organization that should be done to, or is recommended to be done in order to mitigate the situation? The next stage is obtaining approval from the executive team of the plan, again, whether it be a spill, a flood, a fire, a recall. Stage five is executing or implementing the plan. And then stage six is ending the plan and taking a post review of the crisis to say, what did we learn from the situation? What do we need to do differently as an organization? And how do we need to maybe modify our plan or train or retrain our employees based upon the learnings we have from this particular crisis? The next slide, please. All right, perfect. So managing a crisis. So I love this slide. I always train on this slide about following the FACTS framework. The framework is a consistent and repeatable process that I recommend organizations follow. I follow it currently in role. I followed it in my previous roles, and it's simple. It's the FACTS process. So F stands for understanding the facts. What happened? Who did it happen to? When did it happen? What's the brand that's impacted? Is it a food? Is it a consumer? Is it a cell phone? Is it a toy? What is it that is impacted, and what do we know about the situation? How many complaints have we gotten? Are there any injuries? Have people been sick, etc.? The next stage of the FACTS process is to assess the situation. So what do we know? What's the impact from a employee or from a consumer health perspective or safety perspective? What do we know about the situation? And then what actions do we need to take as an organization to proceed to the next stage in the crisis to manage it? The next step is communicate. So determine what the communication messages need to be. What are the messaging within social media, on your websites? And then what are the approved messages that are needed for your employees? What are the timings of meetings to review the crisis? And then the summary. So what's the summary of events that are occurring? Is it being documented? What are the actions that need to take place, and who's responsible for taking the actions? So when I talk about the FACTS process, I always encourage folks to follow the FACTS process through, before, during, and after a crisis. It really helps to ensure organizations are following the crisis and not stepping from the beginning part of the assessing the facts to communicating and communicating through the process. So following the steps of the FACTS process is what is suggested to help folks successfully manage through a crisis. It's a repeatable process. All right. So the next slide is I want to take you through the foundations. Let's see, one more, perfect. The key concepts of a crisis management plan. And I'm going to go through each one of these in more detail. Starting with the fundamentals, we're going to talk through risk management, the various team members that should be participating in crisis management, training that's required or recommended, communication plans, resources that are available to organizations, again, whether it's food, non-food, consumer products, automotive, whatever industry is on the call, there are resources out there. And then program review. So again, taking a step back to review and refine the program to make sure that you are evolving stronger after the crisis. So the next slide talks about the fundamentals. Let's see here, perfect. So this is kind of the basics that are needed and recommended and should be required within a crisis management plan. So understanding and having documented roles and responsibilities within a crisis management plan. I can tell you again, back at my time at Diageo, and then even in my time here with the RQA team and the clients we work with, companies want to do the right thing. Everyone wants to jump in and help and participate in the spirit of making the crisis go away, doing what's right for the business and doing what's right for employees, consumers, and stakeholders. But sometimes the lines could be blurred a bit. And in the spirit of wanting to do the right thing, folks may, jump in and want to help out when it's really not their role and responsibilities. They're doing it in the spirit of doing the right thing, but it's because it's not clearly documented and defined. Within the plan should also be lines of authority and succession, and we'll talk through that a bit more when we talk through team members and the differences between the executive decision teams, the crisis management teams, and just the general team members. It should also have a key definition section. So when we think about recalls, if we were to think about food, obviously there's a class 1, 2, and 3. If we think about Consumer Product Safety Commission, there are the class A, B, and C recalls. So including a definition section within the crisis management plan so that in the event a crisis is occurring, this information is rapidly available for folks to see. On the consumer care front, having prescripted consumer communication plans and templates available. You'll see in some slides to follow that there are some model examples, but having documentation available such as drafted Q&A, templates that are available for you to plug and play. Like if you can see to the right here, there's a notification from the FDA. It's Exhibit 7.4. It's a model recall letter. And pretty much it's 95% ready to go. It's a matter of having the organization plug and play the appropriate brand name, the product, the description, the UPC code, and a picture, and then the relevant information of where the consumers should contact in the event they have this product. So these are really important to have in place and contained within the plan. Links to agencies such as Consumer Product Safety Commission, FDA, etc., supporting documents, procedures within the plan. And then Marie, on to the next, please. And then also just some of the fundamentals is having built into the plan process flow charts, checklists, and various templates. What I see organizations doing is, again, I've seen them all shapes and sizes. I've seen them as little as, 7 to 10 pages, and I've seen them up to 60 pages. It all depends on what the organization wants and how they want to have it designed. But what I see is included in crisis management plans are flow diagrams, checklists and templates where they might be hyperlinks within the documents. So it was a master document, and within the master document, they have hyperlinks of all the various tools that the organization can use to rapidly respond to a crisis. And I shared with you here, there to the right here is an example of just a recall or crisis team meeting minutes and meeting log. Marie will share this, or Cindy will share this with you after the session tomorrow. But it's a form, just an editable form that can be used during a crisis to describe what the incident is, what's occurring, when the meeting started, the date it started, who the scribe was, and who the participants were that were part of the crisis management team, and the actions that were agreed upon, and what the actions are, when the actions are due, and confirmation that they've been completed. Also contained should be contact lists for things like, again, the FDA, Consumer Product Safety Commission, contact lists for retrieval firms, lawyers, PR firms, public relation firms, and things of that nature. Having a crisis command center, and gosh, now these last couple of years with folks being able to work remote, it's a bit easier to communicate, whether it be local or global, because of things like Zoom and Teams and things of that nature. But when you're in a plant and you're manufacturing and you need to be in the location, it's really important to have a centralized command center, or kind of war room, if you will, to be able to work through the data and decision making. It's also important to have established training protocol and a schedule, typically on an annual basis, and then conduct simulations both from a corporate perspective and a local site perspective. Okay, here, the next stage here, the next elements of the foundation is risk management. And my colleague, Melanie Whitman, will be on tomorrow. As Marie mentioned, she's going to talk about, one of the topics she'll talk about is risk management. So I'm just going to share a little bit of information about risk management, as I don't want to steal Melanie's thunder tomorrow. But in the spirit of risk management, it's important for organizations to understand what the risks are for their organizations. Where are their vulnerabilities, and where could they possibly become a target? Once they understand what those risks are, they can understand the likelihood and the impact of that risk. So for a fire, for instance, or a recall, what's the likelihood this could happen based upon where my plant is located? And then what are the things that we need to do to mitigate and manage the risk by developing contingency plans and strategies to support and minimize that risk? And then what are the control measures that need to be put in place to eliminate the risk from occurring? So if we go on to the next slide, please. Here's just a nice snapshot of risks that organizations could consider: fire, explosion, terrorism, cyber attack, supplier failure, and pandemic. Again, lots of learnings coming out over the last couple of years. Again, the risk, the assets that are at risk, people, property, technologies, and then what are the impacts? Could there be casualties? Is it going to impact or damage property? Where there'll be a big business interruption? Is there going to be an environmental concern where now, because of a chemical spill, the environment is being contaminated? And then what's the probability and magnitude, and how vulnerable is the organization to that particular crisis? The next one, please. And then, so from a risk perspective, this is the final slide. This is what I like to use as far as my tool, is just this risk reporting matrix. On the left, it talks about what's the likelihood of this particular crisis from occurring. Hopefully it's in the green, but if there is something that's a high likelihood and it's teetering towards the yellow and red, and then what the consequence is, you're going to need to have really robust plans in place to mitigate those risks. So this is the tool that I like to use, and I like to incorporate into the crisis management plans that I work on. So on to the next slide, Marie, please. And again, as I mentioned, Melanie Whitman tomorrow is going to talk in more detail about risk management. She's got a whole session on it. So I know she'll be happy to answer any questions in that space. The next important element is the team. I'm going to talk through a couple important functions. This slide talks about the EDT, which is the Crisis Management Executive Decision Team. The next slide is going to talk about the EMT, which is the CMT, which is the Crisis Management Team. And I want to help provide clarity about the differences between the two. So there are two important teams. The Executive Decision Team is the team that's responsible for the overall decision-making for handling the specific crisis. The Crisis Management Team, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide, they are providing recommendations to this team, the Executive Decision Team, for what they recommend should be done in order to handle the situation to minimize loss, protect brand, protect consumer, and protect reputation. This Executive Decision Team typically should be a smaller group, a group the size to help rapidly make decisions. And here my notes say 4 to 6 members. Typically what I'm used to seeing is, again, the president of the company would be part of the Executive Decision Team, a senior VP or a high-level role in legal, somebody in manufacturing and corporate relations, and then in governance. And then so those are typically I think that was about 5 team members that I mentioned. So those are typically the members or the functions that would be part of this higher level executive team. And then for the next slide will be the Crisis Management Team. And many of those members report into this team functionally. So again, this team is the team that's going to rapidly make the decision. They may accept the recommendation that's provided from the team. They may reject it, or they may provide some guidance for how to modify the recommendation. Okay, on to the next slide, Marie. So the Crisis Management Team is, this is the team that is going to provide the previous slide, the Executive Decision Team, with recommendations for what they see based upon the risks of the situation. They're going to provide this recommendation to the Executive Decision Team. The Crisis Management Team, I just have a screenshot here. Again, consumer care should have a seat at the table within this team, within Crisis Management Team. So it typically is somebody, maybe a senior manager or director level role within corporate relations, quality, regulatory, customer service, operations, legal. And these are kind of a cross-functional mid-level managers that are assessing the situation, understanding the scenario, and then providing recommendations to the Executive Decision Team on what they believe should be done based upon their experience and all the information they have at their fingertips. They will also be, boots on the ground. They are the folks that are managing the meetings, every day throughout the day, and really executing and implementing the crisis and the management of the crisis, I should say. And they're providing regular updates to the Executive Decision Team on progress to either manage the recall or manage the situation. And they're also letting the Executive Decision Team know if there's something new that's occurring that they need to be aware of that might shift or modify the way that the team is managing the crisis. So from a consumer care perspective, it's just important that contained within the crisis management plan that you understand what your role is, and that you also are part of the crisis management team when these things occur. On to the next slide, Marie. Again, another important part of the team is identifying the delegates. So you've got the Executive Decision Team, the Crisis Management Team, they're seasoned, they know what to do, they know how to do it, but what happens when they win the lottery? What happens when one of the team members goes on vacation? It's really important that across the Executive Decision Team and the Crisis Management Team that there are backups in place, and they understand that they're a backup and they know what to do. So an example I provided here is that if there's a director as part of the Crisis Management Team, for instance, they might have their direct report who might be a manager, a senior manager, or an associate be part of the delegate. You want to keep the delegate within that same function because they will have information about processes and procedures. And the same thing for the executive decision team. If the senior vice president for customer service is part of the executive decision team and they win the lottery or go on vacation, it's important that they've identified somebody within their team, the next level down, maybe the VP or the director, to be considered as a delegate. So it's really important. I have, as part of my role here within RQA, we also conduct simulations, so crisis simulations and recall simulations with teams. And you'd be surprised at how many times clients have said, I didn't realize I was the backup. It was identified during the simulation, and an action coming out of it was that I need to understand what my role and my responsibility is in the time of a crisis. Perfect. All right. And then the last element here for the team is just within the plan is understanding who your internal and external resources are. So if there were to be an employee that was injured, for instance, on the job, you want to make sure that you have somebody identified, that the senior manager of the safety team, to be able to assess what had happened and what steps need to be taken in the plan. For instance, if there was a slip, trip, or fall hazard, to prevent a reoccurrence from happening. And then on the external side, making sure that there's lists and there's telephone numbers for your local recall coordinator, for instance, outside counsel, any consultants that need to do health hazard assessments, laboratories if lab testing is needed, retrieval firms in the events you have to go get product from consumer's home, or you need to conduct recall effectiveness checks. And then also, I think on the consumer care fronts, your teams are on the front line. So understanding where samples or what the process is to pick up samples and send samples back to a warehouse or a plants for investigations, and then what the plan is and what you would do in the event you needed to rapidly identify a call center and or identify a call center or rapidly ramp up call center, because you anticipate, based upon the volume and the severity of the issue, that you are going to start seeing a rapid increase of consumer contacts. So that's an important piece for the consumer care world. Okay, perfect. So great. The next element is training. So again, I didn't mention I'm also an auditor. So I look at records about training on crisis management, training on recall, and ensuring that organizations are doing it on a regular basis. Because the more you do it, you develop that muscle memory. You don't want to be training when you're in the heart of a crisis. You want to be able to have confidence in what you're doing and how you're doing it, because you've gone through the process. You've been trained and you're going through simulations. And then also conduct simulations both at the local level, meaning at the plants, and then at corporate level. And in those simulations, they should be real scenarios that could occur, and taking the team through various scenarios. And the team, it's not just about a trace exercise for a recall, it's the beginning and the end, and including all roles within a crisis. So if we were just to say a recall simulation, you'd want to be including not just the warehousing or the customer service team that would conduct the trace, but the consumer care team, to make sure that you have scripts available. They may put you through the ringer and have you develop or tweak or modify your Q&As for a call center, or standard responses that need to be created. You should assess all levels or all functions, because at the end of the day, you want to understand where you are strong as an organization and where you need to modify or tweak to refine it. You never want to be finding these things out through a real life situation. Okay, so on to the next slide here is on communication. Gosh, we learned that on the Tylenol situation, and then again on BP, if you Google and query those, you'll see how favorable society has responded to the Tylenol, the case, and just the negativity on BP, and just the slowness to respond, and the misinformation that was provided. It's really important that as part of the crisis management team, corporate relations and consumer care are part of the CMT, but then there's also a subset of that team to kind of help frame up and define and come up with those responses. From a communications perspective, it's important to have a company spokesperson who has gone through media training. They know what to say, they know how to say it, and they go through that on a regular basis. Again, within consumer care, having prescripted holding statements available within your CRM platform or somewhere on a shared drive, templates that are available to plug and play, and then having an employee media communication policy. So what happens when, and trust me, it happens, because I know that this happens, an employee, an organization is going through a crisis, and Channel 7 News, in my area, or a local news media in your area comes up to the plant and they say, hey, I hear that your product is killing consumers. How do you respond to that? What should employees say? It's important that they know that they can tell the person from media to direct, please contact this person who's in charge of media for our organization. So it's really important that employees know what to say and how to react. And there's regular training on an annual basis from a communications perspective, because communications, again, especially with this day and age and with social media, exploding, it's really important for our companies to get this right and to be on top. Okay, so I see here. All right, so just looking at some of the cues, so just about some case studies that went well or what went wrong. I can share that with you afterwards. Marie, I can share it with the team afterwards, just some case studies, both on Tylenol and BP, and I can also do some research on some other ones. I'm just looking at questions in the queue.
Yeah, Kim, can we have some recent ones? I know the Tylenol and the BP ones are great, but recent ones with everything that we're dealing in this age that went well and went wrong.
Yeah, let me just do some research just to make sure that I'm pulling some really good recent ones and provide some examples of, because this was so good, what made it so good, and because this was so bad, what made it so bad.
Yes.
I know that several years ago when Chipotle was going through their recall, I believe it was salmonella making people sick, there were some concerns about the lack of response. So let me, as a follow-up from today's session, pull some case studies and share with Marie as a follow-up to share with the team then, so that you have that information, okay?
Thank you.
The other thing I would like to just throw in here too is that Kim is our first presenter, and all of the other presenters have other examples as well. Some case studies, and a few of them are more recent.
Yeah.
So we'll try to assemble all of them into sort of like a case study packet and get it out to you along with whatever Kim also researches.
Yeah, that's great. And I really appreciate the questions. I'm trying to look at the
Kim,
queue.
I was just going to tell you, we just were talking, Deb and I, on how important, when you were on the slide talking about your delegates and the important people being, as the backups, et cetera. I have a bad story for when I first started in my organization. We didn't have as tight of protocol on that. And I remember that a sales guy got a hold of the information and thought he was doing the right thing and just went and sent it all out before it was vetted and before it was even official and ready to be communicated. So that brings back a bad memory of me. You definitely don't want too many people in that inner circle of communication. And that's why I brought up the point. And then Deb said that they had a reorg last year and it was too late for their CA team to get involved. So we were just reiterating how critical that step is to get the right people, and not too many people, but the right people on that list.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then the other thing I see, Christina, in your queue is just you're asking about how to choose when you do the simulations once a year, how to choose because of all the crises that could occur, how to choose. So that's why it's important to as you're assessing those types of risks, having a cross-functional team involved in that risk assessment, and then choosing based upon, your product that you manufacture, things that have occurred in the news, recently that you say, gosh, this could put us at risk, things that might be happening in locally in your area. And then as an organization, just align on prioritizing based upon the most severe that can occur. So hopefully, Christina, that answers your question. Perfect.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, awesome. So the next element is resources. So just know that there are regulatory agencies, there are agencies that are out there that provide a boatload of resources on their websites, whether it be videos for how to report on the reportable food registry, whether there's templates that are available, checklists that are available to help companies manage through their crisis, whether it be a recall, a spill. There are resources out there that can help organizations. It takes time, but just know that there are resources, templates, training, and tools that are out there available on these sites, such as, the USDA, the FDA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. There are videos out there that can help aid and support, and could be tools that are used as you're going through training for your organization, depending on if you're food, consumer products, if you're automotive, electronics, toys, etc. The next slide I just wanted to share with you is there is, let's see here. Perfect. There's, from a recall perspective, I know that's one that, always, kept me up at night when I was on the corporate front. There is a nice tool that's available, recalls.gov, that outlines and states daily the various recalls that are occurring. So you can sign up to those notifications so that based upon your organization and what you manufacture, you're in the know of what's happening in the industry, so that you can take a step back and either reassess your plan, your mitigation plan, and that you're up to date and in tune with what's happening in the industry. And then the last slide here is just program review. So, reviewing the program on an annual basis is typical. It should also happen, though, after every crisis. So if your company is unfortunate enough to have gone through a couple crises within a year, you don't wait for that program to be reviewed on an annual basis. It should happen after every crisis or after every near miss. And then, as I said in the previous slide, reviewing the program based upon what might be happening in the industry, in the news. And then when you go through a crisis, really polling folks across the functions, from the executive decision team and from the crisis management team, to say what went well with what we did and how we operated as a team, both from a leadership perspective, functionally, and then what do we need to do different as an organization? What processes need to change? What do we need to create? Are there other experts we need to include on our master list of contacts? What hung us up during this process? So that you're continuously reviewing, refining, and I say just continuously improving your plan, because when these things hit, they're quick and they really could impact your company, both in a positive way and unfortunately in a negative way if you're not on the ready. The last slide just is from a consumer care perspective. So again, consumer care is something near and dear to my heart. Is just in crisis management, understand what your role and responsibility is during a crisis. Make sure that part of the crisis management plan, well, first of all, that you know where it's at. It's on is it on a shared drive? Is it accessible to you? Make sure that your role and responsibility is documented, and that you understand what the responsibilities are during a crisis, and that your team members know as well. Make sure that the delegates are identified, so that, again, someone wins a lottery, goes on vacation, that there is a backup plan in place. Assure that the consumer care team is trained on crisis management, and this also can include whether you're in-house or if you have an outside call center, making sure that the team knows what their roles and what's expected of them from a call center perspective if you go through a crisis. Have a plan in place for for managing a spike in volumes, whether it be phone, whether it be email, or if it's, responding to things on social media. So is it that you're gonna hire a bunch of people and bring them into your plants and take calls, or do you have an outsourced provider that can help you? If you have an outsourced provider that you're currently doing business with, see what their plan is. If something hits on a Sunday evening or a long holiday weekend, how can they help you rapidly respond to spikes in contacts? Again, reviewing your communications plan, making sure that there are documented FAQs and Q&As available for your websites. Again, you guys, you and your teams are on the front lines. You're going to be getting these calls from consumers and customers, and there's nothing more uncomfortable than having someone contact you. Trust me, again, I was in the role at managing consumer care. There's nothing more uncomfortable for you or the agent that's taking that call to not have the right information available to properly respond, and then just participate in an annual simulation. And it's important that consumer care has a seat at the table. Your voices are important. You and your teams are on the front lines with the consumers. So it's really important that you are participating and have a seat at the table and come participate and be an active member during these types of simulations. So I think that's the last slide that I have. And I hope that we did okay on time, Marie and team.
Yep, we're only off by about 3 minutes, so that's
Okay, perfect. That sounds great. If there are any questions, I tried to review the queue. If there are any questions, my email there is below. I will be on the call all day today and the rest of the day tomorrow. If there's any questions or sidebars, please reach out to me. It's been my pleasure to participate in the session today. I hope I will see you on the at the SOCAP Symposium next month. And thank you again for your time and for your attention and questions.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Kim, and
much.
you're caught up on the queue. You totally caught up on the queue, so great
Okay.
job on that too.
Perfect, great.
Next up, we're having a little break. It's noon probably for many of you, and we thought maybe it would be time to take a break, grab a soda or a sandwich or whatever so that people can continue on. So we'll take about 5 to 7 minute break on this and come back to Beth Ziff.
Thank you.
We'll just wait another minute or two till people come back. Okay, well, if most people look like they're coming back, so we could get started. I'm going to go ahead and share screen, and Beth Ziff, you can take it away.
Thank you, Marie. I appreciate that. I will do a very quick preamble about who I am. I think I joined SOCAP in 1992, but I was very, very young at that time.
Yes, I can tell you, you were a member when I joined, so.
So there you go. So maybe I was six-ish, teenager, let's say.
Yes, I think we were in junior high.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. And at that time, I was in the corporate side of things and working in telecommunications. And my background is in telecommunications, financial services, in the airline industry. And then in 2005, two fellow SOCAPers and I decided we were going to open up a contact center in New Jersey and call it Premier Response and be there for clients like you, very prominent names, but maybe you only needed 3 or 5 people to support your work, or you didn't need hundreds and thousands. Right after we opened our company, we had the spinach crisis in 2006. And if you remember this little company called Earthbound Farm, who still produced great organic foods, well, spinach was being recalled. And back in 2006, they were featured every night on CNN. Dr. Sanjay Gupta is there featuring them, and people had died E. coli in spinach. People didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do. They had 20 calls a day, maybe, if that. And Sam, our sales guy, happened to be out there. They said, we don't need you, but they had his card on their desk. And so when the FDA was knocking on their door saying, what are you doing about this? They called us and said, help. We need somebody to be able to take these calls. And we were a new company, and we said, okay. And we didn't know anything, but we knew we needed to get people. And we learned together what we needed to do. And they had gone from maybe 20 calls a day to about 1,000 calls an hour. And it kept going and going and going. And many, many learnings from that event still apply to this day, because there were some really great things that they did. There were some really horrific things that happened. One, not having a plan. Two, not having people and bodies and knowing what to do. And luckily, it wasn't a huge social thing at that moment in time. Things certainly have blossomed since then. But it was a great way for us to cut our teeth. And I expect those kinds of phone calls. They still happen all the time. So Marie, if you flip to the next slide, this is typically what usually happens. So you're having a crisis, you know who you are, this is what you look like. And if you just click through, Marie, you're going to see these are the kinds of things that happen when we get the phone call, which is what are we going to do? We can't, how are we going to manage through all of this? You can keep clicking through. We don't have people. I don't even know what a TFN is. Somebody just made me do this off the side of my desk. And again, this is if you maybe have a smaller team internally, maybe you have an outsourced provider, but they don't know how to, they've never done a crisis for you. These are typically, I have to have 24/7 people. How am I going to do that? I can't have people 24/7. I can't tell them what's going on. I can't say I'm sorry. I can't give them money back. All of these things come up on that initial conversation, along with, that was the clean version of what people often say when things are really happening. Thank you, Brian, for clarifying TFN for toll-free number. But this happens more often than not in this 2022 day and age. And I will tell you, since that very first event that we had back in 2006 with Spinach, we have probably every year handled minimally 20 to 30 crises of all different kinds, whether it is a food situation and it's E. coli or Salmonella or Listeria. And by the way, you should know that consumers are very jaded. So if it's E. coli and Listeria, they're going to call a lot more than Salmonella. They kind of ignore it, or an undeclared allergen, not as much of an exciting thing for the consumer. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Maybe it's a data breach. I know we're going to talk more about that later. Or perhaps it's something blowing up for you on social, or it's something at a plant, or it's world events that are affecting your business. So very, very interesting stuff. And more often than not, when we get the phone call for help, all of these things in these little bubbles pop up. So I've prepared for you some initial thoughts, some checklists. We'll send those to you, but I'm going to go through this readiness checklist because these are the things that we're going to talk about and ask you about when we have that initial conversation. And I'm so pleased that Kim was talking about the two committees sort of that you should have, this executive team and then the crisis team feeding into the executive team. And I will strongly urge you to get yourself on the executive team, because where we always see a deficit is that initial slide, that person calling us, they're not in the loop. They're just being tapped on the shoulder. The team's made all the decisions and now they have to go and execute. And that might be you. You suddenly have to now execute and manage through all of this. Well, what are you doing? And we're going to come at you with all of these questions, because these are the kinds of things we need to think about and resolve. So it's wonderful to be at that, have a seat at the table and be on that team, because you can think about all of these things that you're going to need to do to execute elegantly when you're having an event. And I will tell you, when you have a crisis, I love a good crisis. You can tell I get very jazzed up about this. My strongest, and if you take away anything from what I'm going to tell you, it's isolate the event from business as usual. Do not include your crisis in the middle of your regular business. You don't need 100% of your consumers and customers hearing about it. You just need the team that's impacted hearing about it. And whether you choose to partner with an outsourcer or you do that internally, you can easily isolate it from business as usual. You can do it in all media in a separate fashion. And that's what you need to think about. I think that's really, really important. The other thing that's really important is every crisis has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the beginning is very intense. The middle, things kind of mellow out, and then they may be very spiky. And then at some point, you're going to declare a crisis is over. You're not in crisis mode forever, even though it may seem that way, especially when it was peanut butter and hummus. Those things seem to have legs. People really love that. Oh my goodness. I know, Deb, you were saying that. Thank you. I'm just reading your comment. So this checklist looks at process, platforms, and people. And what's important is to think about, well, what's impacted? What's happening? And it may not be an actual product. So it might be, again, it might be a data breach. It might be a statement your CEO made, and now it's blowing up on social. But the thing about what is affected is, what is it? What is the issue that is happening that you have to speak to? And then who is affected? What is that? What are the groups that are affected? Are they in the US and Canada? Are they global? How does your incident affect your company if you are global? Very important to know so that you're consistent. Do you have a private label element to all of this if you're food and you provide that? So in the spinach case, was very interesting. And this happens all the time. It happens a lot with we do a lot of work with farmers and some of their brands and a lot of private label. And so you might know the person we're doing business with, we might know that name, but they also grow 70% of the produce for somebody else. They're also impacted. So there are always legs to that. What about the other relationships that you probably need to be supporting? So even though you're worrying about consumers, maybe you're also worrying about customers. And then what about the retail experience? What about your vendor partners, your agencies? What about employees? What do they need to be doing? And again, things you should be thinking about through this checklist. And then what do you need your partner to be doing? Are we taking calls? Are we giving refunds? What are we doing to make the consumer whole? What are the things that are important to the consumer for you to get back from the consumer? So it's really important when you put something together that says, here's what we want the consumer to do. We want them to destroy this immediately. Well, that's important. However, when you tell consumers to do that, they do that. And then when they contact you in any media, you ask them for their lot code or their UPC code or the brand or whatever it may be, but you've just told them to destroy it. So you have to think about how your language and how you put that together. If they have one, do you really need to see proof of purchase? Maybe they have 5, you want to see proof of purchase. So what are those kinds of things? Are you partnering with your retailers and distribution network to make the consumer whole, or are you personally as the manufacturer going to make the consumer whole? Is there nothing that's going to be done for the consumer? Are we just saying, here's our statement about this, and we're going to take your comments and feedback? I will give you a wonderful example of that. So I don't want to name the company, but you may remember this. There was a CEO who was on our former president's commission of business leaders. This was in the Trump era. So he had a commission of business leaders. The CEO of this company hunkered down and said, I am staying on this committee. I don't care what you say, our consumers, I believe in this. I think this is really important, and came out with a lot of statements about this. So on social media for this company, things started to blow up. People started to say, well, I don't support that. I can't believe this. This is terrible. This should not be a political thing. I'm never buying your brand again. All of those things started bubbling up in social. We reached out to the company who were supporting and saying, what do you want us to do? What are those key statements that we need to talk about? And they provided those statements, and we were able to respond to those people. And that was huge. We provided extended coverage, but not 24/7 coverage. They didn't want to do that. Days later, and this happened over a period of about 5 days. Days later, the person resigned, the committee was disbanded, the president got rid of that commission, and before he got rid of it, though, the CEO decided, well, I'm going to finally step down. Now the other half of the people started to complain. Well, what do you mean you're stepping down? Why are you stepping down? That's ridiculous. You shouldn't be stepping down. So we had to manage through. That was a communications crisis for that company. It had nothing to do with any of their brands. It had everything to do with their leadership and what was happening in the media and how they were being portrayed. So it was really kind of very interesting. So in that case, it was strong communication, and that was what needed to happen. It wasn't about, I have to hand you a refund or a coupon or a gift card or any of those kinds of things. The next part of the checklist, sort of resources. What kinds of resources do we need to provide? And I'm sorry, go back, Marie. Sorry, I just want to stay on this one for a minute. In terms of, again, having a dedicated toll-free, when are you going to do that? Making sure you're in all kinds of media, every media. So everything you're doing should be consistent. If you're saying it in a call, you need to say it in an email or on your social pages. If it's being reviewed, if you're chatting, any way you communicate with consumers, same messaging, you need to be able to provide that. And you need to address all of those things in a crisis. You can still isolate them, but you need to be able to address all of them. Maybe you need to support things in language. Is this bigger in another country? Is it bigger in Canada if you're supporting North America? Don't forget those folks, and don't forget that you need to be able to still have all of those resources available. And then the training material is very important, and we'll go through a little bit of that. And then what are we tracking? So we're putting out a lot of stuff. You're sort of identifying, here's what's happening, here's how we're going to handle it, here's our plan of action. So now what are we doing about the communication that's coming back to us? and how are we tracking things, and what are we capturing, and what are we sharing back with you? What are you sharing? What are the insights that you're gleaning so that you can share them with the senior team and saying, here's how many people are reaching out. Here's what they're saying about things. They're satisfied with what we're doing. Oh no, it's not going well. There's a big problem. It's not working out. We've got issues. So all of those things need to be sorted out and thought about. And all of these things evolve. So we say in the beginning, this is what needs to happen. Now you can go to the next slide. Thanks. We have a strong recommendation for things that need to happen in the first 72 hours, but a crisis is fluid and things change. And so even though we may start out with these things, we know that we're going to constantly be checking in every day and talking about what's working, what's not working, what do we tweak, what do we adjust until we get to the finish line. So in the first 24 hours, you have to establish what you're doing with technology, and you should be partnering with someone who can do that for you immediately. Here's a number for you. Here's the messaging. Here's what we're going to do about issues and claims. We're going to either contain that, and again, everything's going to be with the outsourcer, or no, you're going to get those over to us at the business, and we're going to resolve them, or we're going to have a hybrid. Here's what we think we're going to need for staffing, because this is a serious one, and we know we're going to make the news. People are sick and there have been reported illnesses or injuries or whatever it may be. Within 48 hours, you need that up and running. So at the same time that someone's issuing a press release, you need to have all of this done and ready to go. There's also an interesting phenomenon that often happens in every organization. And again, Kim outlined a wonderful framework for what to build and placeholders. And then there's somebody in the company who says, don't tell the service team. Don't let them have this because they're going to leak it if you tell them. Well, the one thing about an outsourced partner, or even in your own organization, if you're doing this and isolating this and creating these kinds of things, we need to know what the information is so that we can put it out there. We need to have the right messaging out there. We need to have the right calls to action. If we don't know what the press release says, we can't do it. If we don't know what the FAQs are, we can't do it. So it's really important that there's limited access, but partnership with who you're working with to say, here's what we're going to be doing. Here are the implications. Now, what else do you need from us to make this go? Nothing goes live or gets published until you've approved it, obviously. But that's really, really important. And the other thing I will share, when you are putting information and communication out, oftentimes it's for the reader. It's written word and it's for the reader. It is not for someone listening. So if people are calling you, you don't want to read them the press release over the phone, right? You want to be able to frame that messaging with, here's what the issue is, here's how you're impacted, here's your call to action, but in a way that sounds right, as opposed to, what am I reading here in this sort of legalese? That's not going to be good for someone calling into your toll free. They don't care about that and they get annoyed by that, by the way. Consumers tell you that, right? When your emails are so standard and stiff and templated that it doesn't sound like you're caring. So really important, and you can do it in a really elegant way. It's just a little more concise, and we can help with that, or someone in your organization can help with that. So it's really important that whoever you partner with helps you frame it in the proper way. What kind of reporting do we need? Are we getting people up and trained? And then within 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours, you should be live, you should be going, you should be having information and feedback ready for the team so they know exactly what's going on. We can flip, Marie, if you don't mind, I appreciate it. And the other part of the readiness checklist is it over? What do we do? How do we get back to business as usual? When do we declare an event completed? And what do we do about messaging? And if you've partnered with an outsourcer, but you have a team internally, how do you bring whatever remnants or tails of that work back into the fold in an elegant way? Important things to think about and ways to do that. We are supporting an event right now where the consumer has to show proof of destruction of the item. It's a baby product, and they have to literally send a picture that shows that they've cut the item so that it can't be used. And then we are helping the client issue a refund because they don't do coupons or that kind of thing. And we keep saying, well, we're down to, about 50 now a day. We were in thousands and thousands. When they said, nope, we can't be done yet. We can't take it back yet. We just can't. We don't have the support, the staff to do it. keep going, keep going. We got to keep doing it. So it's very interesting. You'll know when it's right for you, but we will always check in and go through all of that. And then of course you have to do a postmortem and see what's going on. And so, and I know I'm going very fast because how am I doing on time? I know I have a little bit more.
You're okay. You got until 12:35, so you've got about 8 more minutes or so.
Oh, good. I can do a lot in 8 minutes. Okay. So what I want to share with you, and we'll share this checklist with you so you can have it in detail, but what I want to share next really are,
Is this one?
yeah, and you can click, what I call our, you can stay on this one for a sec.
Okay.
What I call sort of our 18 learnings that we've had over the years. And I call them the top 18, and they really are. It's very interesting. And again, we'll share this list out with you with some more information on it. But brand loyalty, the best time to build brand loyalty, I think, is during an event. And the reason is because people contact you, and they contact you to either tell you they're very upset with you and what are you going to do for me? Or they sometimes contact you to say, I'm with you all the way. I support your brand. Please let me know when it's back on the shelf. I cannot tell you how many times we've heard people say that all the time. They support it. They appreciate the communication. And a lot of it goes to how you've communicated with people. And we'll get to that one in a minute. You could click through again, Marie. It's important to provide choices. And when I say choices, I mean for people to contact you. So you need to be everywhere that you are normally. If you normally support calls and email and texts and social and chat and video, you should be doing that for your event, your recall or your crisis or high volume event. People will choose how they want to connect with you. People also will self-serve. This has been a proven fact. I feel like I can fall on the sword for this one and say this. I've seen this in every single event that we've supported. 70% of the people will self-serve if you give them that option. So you can talk to 30% who you really need to speak to because they have a claim, or whether it's a serious claim or a claim you have to, really investigate. It's really not that serious and you can make it go away. Regardless, those 30% you want to touch. But it happens no matter what the issue is. If you provide a self-service option, and the way we think of self-service, it might be a web form, it could be an elegant bot, something interactive, it could voicemail, no, that's old and no one does that. But putting that web or bot on your social sites, on your website works beautifully, and people self-serve. Number 4, if you ask people for information, if you're going to take the time to collect information from people, you must give them something for it. They will be pretty forthcoming, but they want to know what they're going to get for it. And people always want something. So what is it that you're going to do to make them whole? And the recommendation is always to surprise and delight. So if you're doing a replacement, I know Doug's going to talk and it's not going to be coupons, but a replacement SKU X, let's say, and always surprise and delight and give one more. That goes such a long way. It goes such a long way in an event like this. And people remember that and they stay with you. You do not need 24/7. You can have it, but you do not need it. We've done it for people and no one's contacting in the middle of the night. It's very, very expensive. So I would challenge you as a company to say why. I would ask whoever's saying we need 24/7, why do we need 24/7? What is the value added? If we have automation out there and available for people, they can self-serve 24/7, but you don't need live agent 24/7. For messaging, again, and I think I've mentioned this, you just want to have consistent messaging everywhere that you have a message out there and a call to action that is consistent. You should be updating that messaging frequently. It's really important that you do that. Things change in a dynamic way. I will tell you that messaging can go a long way. When there was chipped glass in beer bottles for one of our clients, and the CEO put a message out on Facebook, and people responded so positively because he leaned into it and said, this has happened. We're going to look into it. It should not have happened. Here's how we're fixing it. And it was the CEO. People were very happy. They jumped on it and in a very positive way. Then it happened a second time to that company and a few years later. and they had to lean in again and re-message again, but they did. And it was, again, received positively because they leaned into it and they got the word out there. So real important. And they kept updating and changing it. Let's go on, keep going, Marie, to the next one. So a combination sort of the recall statement and who needs to know, what are you saying and what is the important thing that you want to convey, making sure it's concise and, again, written in that language that makes sense for the people to read. So even your FAQs, what are the answers? When you have a Listeria or an E. coli, people want to know what that means. So you should always have that definition approved by your teams. Here's what we want to say about that. Or there have been no reported illnesses, or there have been reported illnesses, and here's all we want to say about that. So whatever those legal statements are, those verbatims that we must read exactly, very, very important in your FAQ list that we would need for training. If you want people to free form it, that's great too. We would include that in training, but we're always going to be updating and making sure that we are clear and concise in what we are saying. The other thing about who needs to know, are you using the same information for everybody? Are the employees getting the same information, your distribution partners, not just the service team? We want to make sure we are all one unified message, just doing our piece of the pie, but it's consistent across the board, because we often find that vendor partners, customers, distributors, media all call into the service organization always. They all call that number. And so our folks are trained on how to handle those unique groups and what they're supposed to do about them. Let's keep going because there's about 18. We talked about dynamic messaging and changing that. So keep going, just click. There you go. A plan for the end, really, really important. I talked a little bit about that, but things will end. And even though they seem very spiky, we always say, usually a food thing might be a couple of weeks, maybe 3-4 weeks. And then of course, robocalls happen, loyalty program contacts happen. The club stores want to do it their way. All of a sudden it's a slow news cycle, and now media gets in, and all of a sudden you're spiking again. So you think it's over, and then it's not over. But there can be a plan, and as long as you're dynamic and flexible and fluid with that plan, it's okay. Be transparent is so critical. The more you can share with consumers about what happened, what you're doing about it to prevent it from happening again, and how you're making them whole, makes them satisfied. The less you share, the more you hold back, that you say, well, we don't need to share it, or we don't choose to share it. That's fine, but they're going to keep nagging at you. We see that. And we always say, well, how do you want us to handle this one? So when a company doesn't want to lean into the fact that everyone's reporting that people have been very, very sick, and they don't want to own that it's an issue, or they don't want to say the words, I'm sorry this happened, it should not have happened, here's how we're addressing it. You want to be as clear as you can be within those appropriate parameters and things. Fulfillment, really important. If you are fulfilling, you're giving the consumer something back, and normally you try to fulfill something in 7 to 10 days. If you're having an event, you can't possibly do that. So whether you're having a partner fulfill for you or you're doing it in-house, always add to that timeline. I would always make it 4 to 6 weeks, and then delight the consumers, because you're going to get it to them much sooner than that. But it's real important to set the appropriate timeline, because again, they're upset, they're reaching out to you, you're making a promise, and now you want to honor that promise and make sure that it's consistent, because they're already concerned about the company because you had an incident. So when you fulfill as promised, that just seals the deal and really helps build that loyalty to the consumer. You go through. So plus ones are sort of all of those things where you've added on. So you've had an event, and now a second thing is layered onto that. We've seen that in some companies where they've had a crisis, and now a second thing is being recalled, or a different division, another brand, but it's the parent, and they have all of these things happening at once. And again, it's just a real thing where it's all about how we communicate that and how we handle those FAQs and manage through that. Sometimes we put a team within the team to handle those unique situations. Escalations and claims, easier to manage in an event because you know what it is. You know what The realities are, we can help you with those examples of, here's the kinds of things people are going to claim and can claim. Here's the things that we know happen with this kind of incident. You know, if they're saying, well, it's an E. coli thing and they ate 27 things, you don't know that it's your thing, right? That caused this, but based on the symptoms, and sometimes they've gone to the doctor and you know these things, you know, sometimes you need a nurse to help vet that, or a medical team, or the compliance and legal team. So again, there are protocols and things that we can certainly talk through and help you with regard to that. Sometimes there are unintended consequences. There are multiple recalls from multiple companies going on at the same time, and people try to cross over. They kind of go to tell you the same thing. We've had that happen where one company had 5 items, and they said that if you have 5 or less, you don't need proof of purchase. But if you have more than that, you do need proof of purchase. And another company said, no, if you have 24 or less, you don't need proof of purchase. And we've had that same consumer calling, you know, both companies with the wrong thing. And we've actually called the company and said, look, can we have permission to share this consumer? Because this is a repeater. This is somebody who's trying to scam.
Mhm.
And we can figure that out, and we see that and we know that. So that's an advantage of having an outsourced partner sometimes help you, because they can sort of see that happening across brands if those things are happening. There's just a couple of more. So media attention and news cycles, we see this a lot. You know, a lot of times we joke, but it's not really a joke. You know, we hope for a busy news day so you don't make the media. But depending on who your brand is and what the issue is, you are going to be in the media. And that's okay, as long as we all know how you want us to handle that and what is that, and be mindful of what may happen and how we can help mitigate that. Get those reporters who are calling in over to you, capture that information. A lot of times media may not identify themselves. They may try to get that person who they're talking to say something they shouldn't say. So we spend an awful lot of time talking about that, going through that. And especially now, we just recently had an incident with a radio station calling in, talking to the rep and saying, you're going to be on the radio and you can talk about the cookies that are broken and have an issue. And they tried one rep who shut them down. They called back again, got somebody else who played along. And it was like, oh God, how are we going to handle that one? That was a tough one. So again, training, leaning into it, knowing how to close that down. I think
Hey,
I
Beth, there
covered
was
all
a
of them.
question. I don't
Yep.
know if you have time to do this question, but John had a question about, will there be additional discussions around self-service experience or use cases? Deb thought that was a good idea too.
Sure. You tell, I know I'm on time, so you tell me what you want me to share.
If you have anything to share on that topic quick, I think that would be great. I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted you to know you had a question.
Yeah. No, that's good. Because that was my last slide. It's okay.
This is your last slide, Beth, so you have
Yeah,
to.
absolutely. So, you know, the self-service cases, I have to tell you, it's a really cool thing to be able to do this. We had a situation, so I know I keep talking a lot about food because we do an awful lot of food things, but we had a situation where someone produced a product that was polarizing to people. It was an LGBTQ product that people wanted, and they made a batch of these chips that were in multicolors, and they sold out right away. And there were anti-LGBTQ companies complaining about this product, and then there were the people who love this product. And the company was just getting slammed with contacts. A, where do I get this product? And B, I want to complain about the noise. Either I support it or I want to complain about it. So what we did was we created a site that said, here's how I feel, here's how I feel.com. And they were able to refer everybody to the site. Tell us how you feel. And they collected, all the company wanted to collect was email address, name, email address, and the commentary. And the response after somebody entered the information was, thank you, we're going to share this with our senior team. And they explained they're not going to respond back. They're not going to answer them, but they wanted the feedback. So that was really cool because it was a way for people to get their feelings out there. The company could choose to read them and hear them, and they did, and then respond accordingly and come out later with statements. We've done that many times, actually, when someone has an incident where there's a lot of noise in the marketplace and they don't know how to collect the information. We give them a place to go to collect it, and people want to be online. They know how to do that. They're comfortable with that. Another thing, I'm very much a proponent of bot technology if it's used properly. And when I say that, I know everybody's like, oh, I don't know, and AI and okay. But if it's interactive and you are able to say, do you have this product or that product? Here's either you provide a list of the information you want them to click on, that they have it, whether it's the lot code, the date code, the UPC, I don't know, whatever you're collecting, or you make them enter it. But you can go back and forth and have a dialogue with this bot. It would sort of like chatting, but you're not, or a web form, but it's not a form, it's the bot. And you can have that same thing sit on your website, your social sites, and then you can interact with the people, solve their problem. It goes right into your CRM tool. And then you can fulfill and do whatever else you want. And if they want live agent, they can do that too. Lastly, one other quick example of an event where technology was wonderful to be able to use in self-service. We worked with a company where they wanted to, this was to support their plants and during COVID. And the company wanted people to be able to check in to say that they could go back to work or not. They had no symptoms and they were cleared to go back to work or they were not. And so they would call this number and click on a button that would then appear on their phone. They would be texted. They would agree to be texted. So they'd call in and agree to be texted. They could also send the link via an email to the employee. But the employee agreed up front to either have a text or an email, and then this text on their phone would appear a screen that had 4 questions, and it was a tree. So, you reported into us that you had COVID. How are you feeling now? Again, clicking through, and they were able to go back and forth, and they either got a red, nope, don't come back to work, or a green, you're clear to come back to work. The company then got all that data, got it over to HR, who was able to work and do their magic and do whatever they needed to do internally, and then reach out to those that had an issue. Worked beautifully. They didn't have to talk to them. That was an internal crisis. So really a very interesting thing, and using sort of this visual IVR technology to accomplish that. I have probably millions more.
Thanks for doing those on the fly, Beth.
Thanks for
That
doing
was
that.
3
Yeah.
examples. Bam, bam, bam. Thank you.
You're welcome. I love a crisis. And a high volume event, an HVE.
And you're an expert. You're an
Yes,
expert.
HVE. I want to add in something, just my experience. We had a crisis, and when I was at Gallo, and we reached out to Beth's company to help us do our overflow. And I wanted to reiterate some of the things that she shared with us. Our senior leadership was adamant that we had to have 24/7. And so we did for like the first 4 or 5 days. And after that, we realized, so we looked at our call volume, and we realized it's not coming in, and that, they looked at what they were providing for us. And we said, this is stupid. We're not going to do this. So we cut back on that. So even if your senior leadership wants to start with that, sometimes you have to prove your point to them. And the other thing we did is on her point number 11 about be transparent, we put not only the issue, the UPC number for the product that was in question, we also put it's not these UPC numbers, because we had several different types of product in that brand category, and it was only 1 unit. So rather than, just let people call in about a million things, in our web illustrations and in our press releases and everything, we specifically called out what it was not. And that helped the consumer make the decision as to whether to contact us. And so the people who did contact us and get through to either Beth's group or my group directly, we already were able to clarify most of those people all had the affected product.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Marie, for the example. We love examples. This is a group that loves stories and examples and people's experiences.
Well, I think that was great. Thanks very much, Beth. And Now we're talking a little bit about compensation and when you have to give compensation. So I'd like to introduce Doug Purdley from SKUX.
Thank you, Marie. And I would tell you when we talked about including my part of this presentation, I was a bit humbled because everybody on this call today and tomorrow's got like hundreds of years experience more than me. So I'd like to say between all of us, we have hundreds of years of experience.
Okay.
But what I would like to introduce is something that might feel new, but really isn't. And so I want to demystify digital payments. I want to demystify what we think is scary integration and all those things. And so the other fun thing about this, when we all shared our slides together, we all did our own and then we put them together. I was so thrilled to see some continuity between identifying what the issues are and what the solutions are. And so it made me feel more comfortable to present. So when I look at this next slide, it's some stuff you've already seen where the Food and Drug Administration and the Consumer Product Safety. What I wanted to illustrate here were two things: the amount of volume that's out there. Not only, and this is 2021 data, not only the number of companies that are affected, the number of products, but then potentially the number of items and customers. And the previous presenters have done a much better job than I ever could about illustrating what could happen and being prepared. And so here's just another reminder: it's food and non-food, basically, whether it's potato chips or a bicycle. But the other thing that stood out to me is some of the instruction of how to handle. And it talks about speed. So there's two real challenges here: potential volume and speed. And we're outnumbered. For you hockey fans, we're outnumbered with X amount of agents, X amount of time, with the potentially thousands and millions of consumers that could be impacted. And then it gets forced in this funnel. I want to be first. I want my stuff now. So if we go to the next slide, here's an example. And I apologize in advance for just cherry picking our good friends at KO and Jergens, but it is a recent event where and I didn't even really look at what the event was, but I wanted to illustrate a couple things here. Number one, on the left is their Facebook page, and they have 500,000 followers on social media. And so the second kind of section is the amount of media attention when things get shared. So think about your call volume and then balance that with the microphone the consumer has today of saying, here's what I think of your product. Why is this happening to me? And the volume of products that are in the market that need to be reacted to, the volume of consumers that can now speak to it. And of course, we see this as a real opportunity to how do you take a bad event and turn it into a good event? And there's been great examples of that too. But the other thing I want to highlight here is the cost of the product. So this particular product cost is around $6, $7 in a couple of different retailers. And that becomes interesting to me when we look at the full cycle of how to react and what we're able to do. So if you go to the next slide, we did a study that said X amount of events were out there and what are the costs? And what is the time? And there's always cost to time as well, agent hours, coverage, all those things that have already been illustrated. But we looked at two real specific things: the cost of mailing a check. So the Association of Financial Professionals and some others have said it's anywhere between $4 and $20 to mail a check. That's people's time, that's postage, that's the envelope, that's all those different things. And there's still a lot of companies doing that. And then it took about 35 days to get that reparation out the door. Some much faster, some much slower, again, depending on volume, and again, depending on what's available to you. So what I'm going to illustrate and hopefully kind of introduce for your consideration is using a digital option. So a digital option cost is a fraction of about $1.20. Now that doesn't include the offer amount. So if we're thinking about that Jergens example and saying we're spending $12 and 35 days to get someone $6 or $7 to go buy the product again and stay a fan of Jergens. We had a little blip. You were a customer. Now you're thinking, do I stay with this brand or do I go to a different one? And so why are we spending $12 to send 6 and taking a month to do it when there's options? So the option SKUX gets involved with, we have a fraction of the cost. We also have a fraction of the time. And I'll illustrate that. So I usually ask the audience when we present this is how many of us still get a paper payroll check? Probably very few of us. How many of us, when was the last time we received a paper check? Once in a while, you get a rebate, you get, a recall or whatever. But then what do? We probably take a picture of it and deposit it into our account. So we're automatically digitizing things, unless you're old school and really like to sign the back of the check, go to your branch, sit in line, fill out a deposit slip and do it that way. God bless you if you do. But there's another option out there. So if you look at the next slide, we have the ability to give you payment codes, and think of a payment code as a digital gift card, a Venmo, or a PayPal. We have the ability to set it up beforehand, so you're prepared. And I really love how Beth stated it, is because you don't know how quickly it'll come and how long. It's like a tsunami, right? And so we have the ability to say, hey, listen, and I'll use Jergens in this example. Let's get you set up with the legal agreement. Let's get you set up with the marketing. What does the visuals look like and the text look like? And then a small deposit. I don't know how much it's going to be. Let's call it 10,000. So then when it comes, you tell me, hey, Doug, I need a $5 and a $10, and I need it to look like this. I'm already set up for you. And so now within days, I can have you a CSV file of codes that now you can mail merge. You could self-serve on social. Click here if you'd like to accept this offer. It's fast and it's trackable. So ideally, we'd love to be able to integrate with your CRM system, whether it's Salesforce or Astute or whomever. But until then, we have a solution that gives you immediacy. And so if you go to the last slide here, things to think about. A, look at your own kind of behavior. Do you get a paycheck? The other thing is think about the restaurant industry. And many of our food clients are also in quick serve restaurants or family style restaurants. When you have an issue at a restaurant, do you wait 35 days to get it resolved? Of course not. You call your server, you say, hey, can you take care of this? And we really always love the response from the consumer or from the brand. I think our public is more forgiving on mistakes and less forgiving on reactions. And so we think about, and I use this iceberg kind of analogy is, boy, we all get, and especially in our space, right? We got KPIs for everything. There's printing, there's postage, there's staff hours. I've already heard it addressed as far as, should I have 24/7 coverage? And I think the real opportunity is below the water. When we have issues and we put out surveys, what is our CSAT? What is our net promoter score? And I added lost sales, because isn't the idea ultimately to take a loyal customer, have them forgive us and get the product again as quickly as possible? I think there was a sunscreen recall last year, and it took a while to get money back. In fact, it was announced in season for sunscreen, and many of the reparations came after summer, maybe a little too late. And so think about that CSAT, think about NPS, think about lost sales and brand reputation. I found it really fascinating how we still have a memory for Tylenol and how big of an impact that was. I think about our memory of the peanut butter. That was years ago, right? And so I would challenge this group to think about volume and speed and what's available to you. And so think about the speed of, gosh, Venmo, and especially generationally, right? My mother still wants to get something in the mail, and that's great. Let's appease her the way she wants to be appeased. My son probably doesn't know how to deposit a check. He'll Venmo me for a cup of coffee for $2.50 and the rest. And so for good news or bad, that's the challenge this group has, is saying, hey, my consumers range from 18 to 88. And they all have different needs. Some want to write a letter, some want to pick up a phone call, some go online, some go on social. And so what we want to present at SKU as is an option for you. It's another arrow in your quiver to say, listen, if I have to act fast and if I have to act with volume, I've got a tool that I can use digitally, both in email, on social, however way I want to do it. And so short and sweet from our perspective is rethinking the process, rethinking that back end that says, okay, crisis averted, but then how do I treat these consumers and get them back shopping my product again, which the sales team certainly is interested in, the CEO is certainly interested in. And so there's a tool out there, and if I can help anybody getting you set up for a test or a pilot, let me know. That's all I have, Marie.
Thanks, Doug. That was really good. You know, I can't help but think about how this could work in social when the volume is just, like you said, a tsunami. It's crazy.
Well, what you see now is a lot of brands, when consumers are calling you out, right, wrong, or indifferent,
Mhm.
they'll say, please DM me Monday through Friday and
Yeah.
give call hours. And it doesn't have to be that way. You take it off of the public megaphone, bring it to a direct message. You have tracking there, you have speed there. I can deliver a code. In fact, I was going to do it with this audience, but didn't want to go too far.
Yeah.
But it's a social application, it's an email application. When you can deliver something with volume and speed, solves a lot of problems.
Hey,
And
Doug,
cheap.
have
and
you
cheap.
actually, have you had any clients or business partners use this in a recall situation?
We are in the middle of contracting with a major food group for exactly that reason. And it's really interesting, two reasons. One is, once they understand the platform, they know they can use it for marketing and doing promotions, and they know they can use it for consumer affairs. But then they're now saying, okay, I could really use it for recalls too, including crisis management when there's natural events. So they have multiple restaurant units all over the country. And if there's a tornado and 5 of their stores are knocked down, they want to use it to give money to their employees.
I think if God forbid there is a recall with one of your clients, but if they happen to use it, I think it would be interesting to do some type of case study to see how it worked.
In fact, one of the advantages, I happen to be in Florida. Orlando is kind of the conference headquarters of the planet. And we're going to be at the hurricane conference next week or the week after, because preparedness for these unexpected volume events and a lot of different ways to do it. So the example I just gave you, Brian, was a company that says if they got 4 stores that are flattened, and I thought of Kim, the fire at the Walmart location, the foundation for the company wants to give money to employees quickly. And today they're like mailing things. Well, if there's a tornado or a hurricane, so many different ways to act with speed and volume. But yeah, we're absolutely going to do a white paper when we have a live event, with their permission, of course.
Looks like there are a
One
couple
reason I
questions.
wanted to bring Doug on at this point in the session is because it goes to the total circle of what Kim and Beth have shared out. And that is, 1, have a plan and be prepared. And secondly, build your partnership so that when you have something that you need to execute, your crisis level of your stress level in your crisis can be lowered because you've already done all the pre-planning and you've already got your outsourced partners and your business partners like this lined up and ready to go. And that's one reason why I thought this would be a good example of another kind of a business partner. We tend to always think of the outsourcers, but even the AI applications and all of those things are part of that preparation.
Marie, there are a couple questions in the queue.
Questions?
There are a couple questions I see in the queue.
Yeah, sorry, you guys, I'm back. I had a
Cindy to
technical
pop off,
issue.
her internet went down. So good. Can you go over the question, Cindy?
Yeah. So Christina asked about the codes. Can consumers use the code on products? How can we confirm it with use only on our products?
Yeah.
i.e. not letting it buy whatever you want it to buy, but just their
Yeah.
products.
So it's interesting, that question with the question right after it with Amazon. So the technology exists today to have what's called a filtered SKU. And we're working very closely with an important company that's going to help us deliver that. It's not ready today. It's going to be ready in months, knock on wood. But think of when you have food stamps and some of those different products where you can only use it on diapers and this and that. So it's the technology exists. We're bringing it in-house. It's just a matter of when we're going to launch it. So yes, we'll have that ability.
Okay. And then I think the other comments were just looking forward to learning more. So I think we're caught up. Let me double check. It looks like, yeah, you
That
hit
is-
the Amazon one. So I think you hit everything.
That is one of the downsides of checks is that it could be spent on anything. And we've discussed that a lot in the CPG group. Because if you issue a refund check, consumers can spend it on whatever they want, not necessarily your product.
Well,
So,
and the other option, Marie, we didn't really talk about is omni-channel.
yeah.
So with a paper coupon, you're kind of stuck with using it in store, which is great.
Yeah.
But with COVID and everything else we've learned, I can deliver a code that can be used either or.
In Amazon or anywhere else.
Yeah. Deb
Correct.
mentioned that you can, they used e-gift codes online for online stores with their last
Mhm.
recall, and that was a winner in their book. So
Oh,
Yeah.
for those of you not playing along
Thank
in the
you.
chat.
Thank you, Doug. We appreciate your input on this as an option for another partner that we might want to employ.
Thanks, Doug.
We're going
Thank
to
you.
take a little bit of a left turn right now and talk about something that isn't so product related. And that some of you may remember Michelle Schuster presented at our fall symposium. She is a founding partner at McMurray and Schuster and has, I could give her days to talk about this situation, but we only gave her a half an hour. So let's move on to Michelle.
We'll make a half an hour work for sure.
All right.
And relevant to this conversation, I'm a former consumer protection chief from the Ohio Attorney General's office. So I'm on the company side of issues now, but I used to be a regulator enforcing the consumer laws that we now help folks comply with, including data privacy, security, and breach laws. And so, this is an important topic right now because they estimate that the cost of data breaches is $6 trillion a year. So it's not an insignificant amount. And the numbers, as I'll show soon, are increasing. And interestingly enough, I just got a notice from the New Jersey court system that they were closing down their system from any foreign filing. Because I think we've all heard in the news lately with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, that there's been a heightened alert for data breaches and cyber attacks on American companies and critical infrastructure. So I think it's a timely issue right now. And if you take all of the things that the previous speakers talked about, you can apply that to what I'm talking about with the response. The only thing that's a little bit different about data breach responses is that they are covered by some specific laws and regulations. We're not going to really get into those today. Those are for the lawyers on the teams, but to the extent that those laws affect how we have to respond to things, that's built into this presentation. But Kim and Beth in particular did a great job of setting me up for this presentation, making it a little bit easier. And so next slide. I think the city of Atlanta probably put this best as they were responding to a data breach that was in the headlines for quite some time and did a lot of reputational damage to them when they said that we are here to prepare for the inevitable. And I think they're right. If you look at a survey of the percentage of companies that have experienced data breaches, you'll see that that number is increasing ever more rapidly. All right, next slide. So what is a data breach? It can be in the form of a number of different things. And while there are specific statutes that define data breaches and what the information is that has to be breached in order to qualify for a data breach, the types of things that are on the screen now are generally what we're talking about: username, address, phone numbers, credit card records, social security numbers, bank account information, other financial institution information. That's usually the type of sensitive information that we're talking about. Next slide. And as I said, there are state data breach notification laws, and every state in the United States has a data breach notification law. Most of them require that you give consumer notification Think back to the types of things that Kim and Beth were talking about, because that type of consumer customer friendly touch is so critical in those notifications that you're going to be required to give if there is a data breach that triggers the data breach notification laws. But also, in addition to the consumers, it goes a little bit further. And as a result, it makes it more likely that these types of things are going to get into the headlines. Some states require that you notify local law enforcement. You may want to notify vendors, especially if it's affecting vendors. You may also want to notify business partners, as these things have a tendency to affect business partners. And lastly, this notification requirement for regulators, and in particular the state attorneys general's offices. Many of the state data breach laws have that requirement. And the state attorneys generals, I can tell you from having served two, are political beings. They have to get reelected every 4 years in most states. And so these are the type of things that they look for to make headlines. This notification requirement definitely triggers a well planned out data breach response plan, which I should say is also required in several states, California probably being the most widely reaching of the state data breach data breach response plan laws. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about statistics, so why do we care about data breaches, and why are we going to prepare for a crisis response for a data breach? If you look at the statistics, they tell us that cyber attacks are near constant a threat. They occur every 10 seconds, which is almost impossible to believe. The cost of sensitive data breaches is estimated at $180 a fine per data record, which when you see the numbers of records that have been breached that get into the billions of records for some of these data breaches, that becomes a very high number very quick. The global average cost for a company is $425 million per data breach. Now, obviously, that's for the larger data breaches that are really skewing that high average, but it's a number that should get folks' attention. The elapsed time for detection, if it's an employee breach, it's usually about 207 days. If it's an external breach in the form of maybe a hacker or ransomware, you're looking more at 75 days for the average elapsed time. And the reason that's important is because the longer these breaches are allowed to persist, the greater the number of people that are affected by it. So it's one of those things that having an incident response plan or a crisis response plan is really critically important because once you find out about a potential breach, you need to start moving immediately. There's been a significant increase in the third-party supply chain attacks. 6% of the attacks overall are as a result of suppliers that companies use. It's really important that as you onboard suppliers and vendors that are going to have your clients or customers' personal or confidential information, that you do due diligence on them, and that you also have contractual provisions that set out what your requirements are for data security, because the best way, obviously, to handle a data breach is to prevent one at the get-go. Ransomware attacks are increasing every year. They accounted for 17% of the attacks in 2021. Interestingly enough, there are states now that are passing laws that specifically address ransomware. There was a debate that went on for many years about whether ransomware was actually a breach, and most of the regulators would say that yes, indeed, a ransomware is a data breach because they had access to your records. So that's something that should be treated that way, and may require insurance notification if you have a cybersecurity plan. So important to not just pay those and try to sweep them under the rug. We've seen a lot of really bad situations where companies that were hacked and systems overtaken and sent a notice with ransom demand to unlock their systems end very poorly because they weren't reported. 35% of the consumer victims lost up to $499, and 21% of them more than $200,000. So you know that 41% in the middle lost somewhere between $500 and $199,000. So not insignificant numbers here for the effect of these data breaches, and also emphasizes the importance of, when communicating with these consumers, how important it is to have an appropriate crisis response plan to the data breach. Next slide. If you look at the number of data breaches that occurred over the past 5 years, the numbers are significant. 2018, we get into the trillions, and I think that's to a large extent because of a Marriott data breach that happened that year, but there were also 2 lead providers or consumer data collectors that had breaches that year that also attribute to that very large number. You know, I'll have to tell you, when I started working in the privacy area in 2005, after I left the AG's office and went to work for a large firm, one of my first clients was one that involved a data breach. But back in 2005, it was a little bit different than it is now. While they certainly had the cyber attacks, the first 2 data breaches I handled were paper. And so while we primarily now talk about cyber attacks, you have to understand that it actually goes broader than that. The first case I handled, it was, it was impossible to believe that people still function, or companies still function this way, but the first one involved a Rolodex. Does anybody remember what a Rolodex is? And I'm literally talking about the Rolodex with the cards on it that had every one of their business customers' information on it, as well as their credit card number, so the mailroom could charge that account as the shipping went out. And that Rolodex disappeared. And so those types of incidents are also data breaches. The second one I handled involved an employee who was not screened appropriately, had a criminal record that included financial fraud, and she took to taking records from her employer that included the employer's customers' credit card information. So this is something that has been around for a while, and the response in both of those issues, we were able to identify a specific group that was affected. So as you can imagine, when you're in the middle of a crisis response, being able to limit it to the smallest possible affected group is really important. And we spent the first couple of days in that response just really trying to narrow down what potential customers or businesses were affected. And that's what will happen as those are handled nowadays. First, determining, is this a data breach that requires notification? If so, what type of notification? And then trying to identify who the individuals or businesses are that are affected. Next slide. So we've already talked about the reputational effect, but the studies that have looked at companies that have experienced data breaches show that when you surveyed the victims that were the subject of the data breach, they lose trust in an organization. I think that's pretty intuitive, and we all understand that's going to happen. But also, consumers leave a business that have compromised their information. They would prefer, given all things equal, to go to a company that they haven't had that type of experience with. So this does have the potential of losing customers if not handled in the right way. And then obviously, as we've talked about, the negative word of mouth, both verbal and social media and on company websites as consumers post, have an effect on companies, and important to try to control those types of things from the get-go. Next slide. So in those surveys I talked about, 87% of consumers that were victims of data breach said that they were willing to take their business elsewhere. 46% of the organizations say after a data breach that they had suffered reputational damage, and 10% of the organizations said they suffered not only reputational damage, but also brand damage. And those types of things have lasting effect. And I will tell you, it has been my experience in seeing how companies have handled data breaches, that the quicker they are handled, the better they are handled, the less you'll see those statistics affecting those businesses. And then always, I think it's important just to consider the consumer harm, because as you're responding to these crises, you have to understand what the consumers are going through. And for them, it's a long-term damage situation. If information has gotten out that allows for identity theft, then that's something that the consumer is going to have to continue to monitor, likely for the rest of their life. Because we have found that with the criminals that are engaging in this type of cybercrime or data theft, they tend to share this information. So likely it goes beyond who actually was involved in the initial data breach or the initial crime. Next slide. So it's so important in that the response is either going to make or break your reputation. Next slide. So what causes the most reputational damage? Next. I think it's pretty obvious from what we've heard, it's the headlines. And, the headlines for the companies that don't handle data breaches well. And if we have time, we'll go through an example of one that involves Target that could have done things a little bit better as they responded to their data breach at the holidays a couple of years ago. But the critical thing, as Beth and Kim have touched on, is controlling that narrative and making sure that the information that gets into the headlines is doing the least amount of damage possible. It's not usually possible to make it a positive thing when it gets into the headlines, but definitely looking for causing the least amount of damage possible. All right, next slide. We've heard a discussion of the folks that are involved or the key team members that are involved when there's a data breach in the response effort. And so on this slide, it's similar to what we've heard in the previous presentations, except that IT and cybersecurity teams are going to be involved in this type of data breach. So you'll be dealing with the technical folks within your organization, the ones that may not be the most sensitive to the effect on consumers and more of the strictly just the facts type of person. But that's what you want from the IT and cybersecurity team. The first thing they're going to try to do is identify how the cyber incident happened or how the data breach happened. The next thing they're going to try to do, and the very most important thing, is that they find a way to stop that, to plug any security holes that may exist. The lawyers will be generally directing these types of investigations. And the reason that happens is because the companies generally want to have an attorney-client privilege as they're conducting their internal investigations. And if those investigations are done through in-house counsel or outside counsel, then that's the actual investigation is likely to be able to remain attorney-client privileged. The public relations consultants, we've heard from them. You've done an excellent job of describing what the roles are in the data breach, but they'll work with the IT team and the lawyers to take those kind of technical explanations of what's happened to put those into a consumer-friendly, media-appropriate type of message about the data breach. And I will tell you that because the laws differ in all states, not all data breaches have to be reported. Some states limit the data breaches that are reportable to consumers and require other types of notifications to a certain number of records. Some limit it to only electronic breaches. So the Rolodex and employee issue would not be the type of issue that would be required to be reported in those states. Some require that only certain information have been involved in the breach for it to be reportable. But once that's determined by the lawyers, then working with a public relations consultant in those situations where it's required to be reported is going to be critically important. Also, the executive team and the department or brand managers will be involved. The speed at which, especially the executive team and the department and brand managers respond to a data breach is so important. There's a case that's actually going on right now in the courts that involves a law firm that had a data breach that didn't report it to its client whose records it affected for a year. And so the lawsuit is about the damages that were incurred by that client as a result of a failure to report. And so these aren't typically situations that you can sit on. These are things that have to be responded to immediately, especially when notification is required. Interestingly enough, and as this group was preparing for this presentation, we were talking about how frequently service providers are the ones that have the lax security standards. And it is probably at least once a week that I see law firms that are in the news because they've had these type of cyber incidents, cybersecurity incidents, data breaches. And, you know, if you think about it, the lawyers are the ones that have the most sensitive information about their clients generally. And something that I would recommend, a project I've been involved in, is the Association of Corporate Counsel, and they've started a regulatory, self-regulatory organization for law firms for assessing their cyber security policies and procedures. Our law firm's one of the first that's gone through that, because I just think this is such an important issue that clients have trust that their lawyers' records are safe and secure. Obviously, there are those types of secure certifications for other types of businesses. There's SOX certifications, there's PCI certifications. There are a number of different types. And so important to ask your service providers if they've gone through those types of things, and ask that they prove that they have the type of cybersecurity that you would expect for the sensitive information that they hold that belongs to your company and its customers. And then lastly, there's the HR department, which gets involved with personnel issues. Next slide, Marie. And this just, you know, kind of goes into detail what I've already talked about. The IT professionals are going to shore up the systems, determine what service providers were involved or affected, create a forensic after action review, and then report what happened, how, and why. Then that information, next slide, will be used by the rest of the team. As I said, the lawyer is going to direct the investigation in most situations, and that's usually the recommendation. Also, they're going to determine who's required to be notified. They'll assess the liability. There are fines per record that is breached. And so it'll be assessed in that way. And then there also can be civil penalties and fines if a regulator determines that there is some type of violation there. And that can be in the way of an unfair or deceptive consumer act because a company did not secure the consumer's information in a way that was expected or required under the law. But there also can be civil penalties that are associated with that. And as I mentioned, the lawyers are going to work to help develop the narrative with the public relations consultants. Next slide. Public relations consultants, you know, I think when we're working with the PR folks, you know, generally the information that they are gathering and what they're going to direct to the public are those things that we anticipate that consumers are going to ask. You know, how did this happen? How did my information get breached? How did it get out there to criminals? And then what information was taken? Is this my credit card number? Do I need to cancel a credit card? Is this all of my personal sensitive information that will allow someone to commit identity theft? Is it account number just for your business? So figuring out exactly what information was involved in the breach will be critical to how the messaging occurs. Also, if we know that the information has been used, how that information was used. And, you know, I call consumer complaints golden tickets. I might be the only person on this call that calls them golden tickets. But if you have a consumer complaint, then you know the area that you need to work on. And when it comes to data breaches, if you have a consumer complaint, then it usually will be something like, I just purchased something at your store or online with my credit card, and then within an hour, somebody else is using that credit card to make purchases. So that's going to give you a heads up that you might have a problem there that is a data breach. Or it could be that, information I gave to you has now been used to open up an account in my name. So your consumer facing employees that would receive that information really need to be trained to interpret those types of complaints as the sign of a potential data breach. Also, what actions they can take to remedy the situation. I am a huge fan of the Federal Trade Commission's website, both for businesses and consumers. They do a great job with putting together educational material. And when it comes to data breach information for businesses and consumers, that is no exception. Their website is ftc.gov. But as you're responding to a data breach to consumers, there's a how-to guide for businesses. And then there's also a resource for consumers that tells them what they should do if they've been a victim of data breach. All the types of things we would think about, maybe a credit freeze or credit monitoring service, which typically businesses are going to offer if there's been a data breach. They'll offer it to the affected people so they can monitor their credit reports.
Michelle, just want to let you, a time check. We've got about 2 more minutes.
Well, good. That's, I think, executive team, I think we've already talked about that in HR. You can skip to the crisis communications is never easy. We've talked about this, have a plan. And the key is to keep it simple. Take responsibility for the problem and fix it. So critical that the responsibility is taken and that you actually fix it. Next slide. Because we just have 1 more minute, I thought it would probably be a good idea to maybe just give an example. Is there anybody from Target on this call? I always ask these things when I give examples. I didn't see anybody come in, so.
If we're victims of the Target breach,
Do what?
if we're victims of the Target breach.
I think we were probably all targets of the Target breach. Well, that's hard to say. But yeah, I did get notification for that one, and it was right before Christmas, and it made me a little bit leery about the credit card that I had used there earlier. But just in terms of the response that Target had to the data breach, they start out pretty well, and they issue this statement. It says, yesterday we shared that there was an unauthorized access to payment card data at our US stores. The issue has been identified and eliminated. We recognize this has been confusing and disruptive during an already busy holiday season. Our guests trust us. Our guest trust is our top priority at Target, and we are committed to making this right. So a great start for how Target initially handled that. I think we would all say that's a completely appropriate response. The next statement was, we want our guests to understand that just because they shared or they shopped at Target during the impacted time frame, it doesn't mean they all are victims of fraud. In fact, in other similar situations, there is typically a low level of actual fraud. Most importantly, we want to reassure our guests that they will not be held financially responsible for any credit or debit card fraud. And to provide guests with an extra assurance, we will be offering credit monitoring service, as I mentioned. We will be in touch with those impacted by this issue soon on how and where to access the service. In the meantime, here are some additional tips. And then they listed the types of things I mentioned are on the FTC website. So still doing an excellent job. The next one, they start going a little bit downhill. We understand it's been difficult for some guests to reach us via our website and call center. Staffing them, so important. I think I heard Kim and Beth talking about that. We apologize and want to understand that we are experiencing unprecedented call volume. Those words should be expunged by any company's vocabulary that has a call center. And our Target team is working continuously to build capacity and meet our guest needs. So going a little bit downhill there, not meeting the customer's needs and being responsive and talking about building it after they already know what the issue is going to look like. And then lastly, which I would say is where they just kind of tanked on their response, they said, we take crime seriously. It was a crime against Target, our team members, and most importantly, our guests. We're in this together, and in that spirit, we are extending a 10% discount, the same amount our team members received to guests who shop in US stores on December 21st and 22nd. Several problems that I have with this, they mentioned themselves first as being the crime victims. They most certainly should have mentioned the consumers first. And as a former regulator, I will tell you that the 10% discount for more shopping is something that we have always frowned on, because you are incentivizing or giving companies a reward by driving more traffic into the company, and they almost always are going to buy much more than if it's oops, my time is up, Marie. Look at that. I didn't turn the timer off.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Perfect timing. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
And I really wanted to touch on data breach because I've had a couple of experiences with it, both as a victim, but also my employer was breached and I had to deal with it from an employee point of view. And a lot of the questions that were asked were driven to the contact center. So the contact center was on the front line of answering all the consumer questions and the employee questions in both of those circumstances. So I thought it would be worthwhile to bring into this as a potential crisis that would be faced by consumer care. And now we'll move on to Michelle Wright. She's the CEO of the Dark Art of Food Labeling, and she'll tell us about label claims, truthful and misleading, and those are some of the things that drive our crisis problems. So Michelle, you're up.
All right, thank you, Marie. If you want to go to the next slide. Label claims, truthful and misleading. And I want you to know that we're going to turn another corner here and work on how to prevent issues that could create consumer affairs responses, because I, unlike Beth, am not a fan of a good crisis. So this is what we're going to talk through. If you'll give me the next slide. Some of you may be saying truthful and misleading. How is that possible at the same time? And I understand completely. You want your food or any packaging to be completely truthful. And yet there are times when what we as the food industry or the industry that creates the product deems as truthful, consumers or others may see as misleading. So we're going to look through this at 3 case studies where the way the food company, and I use food examples because I've worked in the food industry for a long time, but these examples will apply to any other industries as well, were not deemed misleading, and yet that was not how they were responded to. So if you want to give me my next slide. In this first example, and if I had any food scientists on here, they would be cringing at me. Del Monte made a no preservative claim on their canned green beans. And they would say to you that sea salt, which is in these canned green beans, is there for flavor only and has absolutely no effect on preservatives. And from a science standpoint and a regulation standpoint, in 21 CFR 101.22, you will see that FDA actually has an exemption for salt, sugar, and vinegar as a preservative. That this is not a preservative. These green beans and the salt are put in the can is sealed, and then the can is processed to the FDA standard for commercially sterile. And there's a whole lot of forms that food companies go through to ensure that they hit that commercially sterile standard. So in no way, shape, or form is this sea salt that is in these green beans used as a preservative. And yet, as we sit here today, Del Monte is currently facing a class action lawsuit on their no preservative claim in these green beans. And if you give me my next slide. And the reason for that is because what we face with litigation does not always line up with what we see for regulation. So when you're looking at new claims on any of your products, you want to think about them not only from a regulatory lens, but also from a litigation lens. There are several claims on food packages like natural that I never allow or never encourage clients to use because they are just too high of a risk for litigation. There have been over 50 lawsuits on the natural claim, and most of them were not based in any way, shape, or form on the science of what was happening or the FDA regulations and guidance around what was happening. So when you're doing these label claims and when you're pushing through this, I want you to not only think about the regulations, but also to take a minute and think about what other forces are out there, like litigation, that could affect your packaging or your risk of having an event. Can we slide to the next slide, please? And give me one more click, Marie. So on this Honey Bunches of Oats package, I should say that the Del Monte issue is still being litigated. We don't know where that's going to come out or what is going to happen with that. So I can't give you the outcome. On this Honey Bunches of Oats package, however, we do know what happens. They put a high fructose corn syrup claim up here, and you can see that I've circled it so you can all find it. And the question I put out to all of you is nutrition claim or ingredient claim? And some of you may be saying, I don't know, it seems like an ingredient claim to me. Prior to June of 2020, all of us that do food labeling, food regulatory, food legal, and most R&D people would have said to you, absolutely, this is an ingredient claim. We're talking about the high fructose corn syrup. And as long as this product doesn't have high fructose corn syrup in the ingredient statement, it completely meets that claim. The class action attorneys went to Post and said, no, based on 21 CFR 101.62, I believe. No, it's 6.5. That is a nutrition content, an implied nutrient content claim. And you are making the implied claim that you have no sugar added. However, because the product's name is Honey Bunches of Oats, we know that they do have other sugar added in that you have to have honey in a product. Call it Honey Bunches of Oats or to have honey in your product name. So although Post truly did not have any high fructose corn sugar, and all of the industry experts that they would have asked would have said, yeah, this claim seems completely clear. And to be honest, I had given other clients exactly the same advice on different products. However, a class action lawsuit was filed against Post saying that this was a nutrient content claim, and Post ended up settling the claim last summer, in the summer of 21, for $15 million. They have also removed the claim from their packaging going forward. So as you can see, just because what all of the experts said and thought didn't line up with what the litigators or class action attorneys believed, the landscape has changed. If you can give me the next slide. So when you are looking at label claims, any type of label claims, and it doesn't matter who you're regulated by, whether it's FDA or USDA or FTC or EPA or whoever your regulators are, you want to look at the labeling claims not only for how they are now in the way you would see them today, but we want you to take the time to turn them upside down and backwards and look at them from all angles and try and think about them outside of the normal box so that you can anticipate an event or maybe protect yourself from an event by doing this. And there's some other interesting examples. The one I found just recently is there's a bone broth on the market that has a disclaimer that says not a good source of protein directly below their X grams of protein claim on the package. And they do that because the protein quality doesn't get them to 10% DV on their product. So that's a new way of thinking it. They've put a disclaimer on that package to protect themselves from exactly these kind of things. I only hope they didn't do it because they got a demand letter and changed their packaging before we all got to experience the class action lawsuit, because there are a lot of demand letters that go out that don't become public. The food industry or whoever's getting them deals with them quietly inside of themselves. Okay, Marie, you want to give me my next slide? So you guys have all probably heard of CBD or cannabidiol it is thought to be the medicinal ingredient in marijuana. THC is thought to be the psychotropic ingredient, but cannabidiol is thought to be the medical medicinal ingredient that's found in marijuana. And there are also small amounts of CBD found in hemp products. So how are we going to regulate CBD? The questions are out there. Everybody's weighing in. Nobody really knows. Can you give me 4 clicks, Marie? So is it going to be a drug? Is it going to be an over-the-counter drug like your Tylenol or your Tylenol or maybe your lidocaine or something like that? Is it going to be a dietary supplement, or is it going to be regulated as a food? And the truth is, we just don't know. And if you ask the FDA, they will tell you that today they are regulating it as a drug. There is one drug to treat epilepsy that has been approved by the FDA that you can get through your doctor in a prescription at your pharmacy that does contain cannabidiol CBD. Now, you all may be saying to me, wait, I walk into a grocery store or a big box store and there's CBD all over the place. And I'll say, I totally agree. I see it too. The natural food industry or the dietary supplement industry has been working really hard, and they're even going so far as to press Congress to pass legislation that would allow this to be approved as a dietary supplement. They have submitted cannabidiol CBD as a new dietary ingredient, which is the first step in the process of getting that approved. At this point, FDA is sitting on that petition. They will not react to it. Their statement and their position on it is that we don't have enough science, which is, in my opinion, not an unlegitimate position. If you try and go read the science, there just isn't a lot out there. And there's very limited research on drug interactions and how it affects people with other medical issues. So there really is a lot that isn't known. Now, if you're thinking food, right now it's not allowed as CBD in food. You will see, and there are 3 ingredients. It's a hemp seed, a hemp flower, and a hemp oil, all of which contain some naturally occurring CBD that can be used in food ingredients. So you will find some small amounts of CBD. However, nobody's allowed to make claims on these other than that the product contains hemp, and it has to contain one of these ingredients. So I get asked regularly by a number of people, and I've been asked tons of times, predict what's going to happen. What is FDA going to do? How do you know? And if you give me the next slide, Marie, my answer is, I don't know what FDA is going to do. I don't know how this CBD thing is going to work out. I do know that in 2019, FDA issued a number of warning letters, including in the states of Colorado and California, where marijuana is legal to be sold, saying that CBD could not be sold as a dietary supplement in standard retail establishments. Now, I don't think that's changed anything, but that's out there. So where does FDA stand on this? If you want to sell either foods or dietary supplements or lotions or anything like that, you need to do it through the dispensaries in those states. You can sell it in locations where you can buy marijuana for other reasons, and it can be sold through those locations, but it should not be out in the retail market. That's FDA's position as of today. And as far as those of you who are asking me what to do, I don't know. I know that there are some plants being built, some manufacturing facility plants to manage CBD, and that I have encouraged those people to build their plants in a way that would allow them to be drug plants if that needed to happen. because the way you set up and build and design a drug manufacturing facility is very, very different from how you set up and design a food manufacturing or dietary supplement manufacturing facility. So my question is, or my takeaway is, be careful when you're predicting the future, like with this CBD thing that we all hear about daily, and even probably some of us have bought. The regulations and the future is not clear. And I want you to be aware that predicting the future as a food company or as any company can be tricky and can lead you down a path that gets you to an event and has you calling Beth in an emergency. Next slide, please. And thank you. So I want you to remember that when you're thinking about labeling claims, the most important thing to do is to take a step back and really think through this. Think about not only the regulations, the compliance, the guideline, what's out there, but also the lawsuits, the news, the blogs, the social media. Where else can I go for information and see what people are saying about this to give you that other perspective so that you can look at things differently than you would have traditionally, and you don't end up like Post with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit because you were thinking about things only traditionally. And then I advise you to be very, very careful when trying to predict future, because I often say to my clients, unfortunately, my crystal ball is in the shop and I'm not any good at that. So be careful when you're predicting the future. The future is unpredictable, as we've all learned in the last few years. And I want you to be careful when doing that. Next slide. Are there any questions? And before I jump off or answer questions, I want to tell you that the Dark Art of Food Labeling can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we post videos every week that explains and takes the mystery out of food labeling in a way that hopefully the consumer can understand.
Hey, Michelle, I think it's still true. Isn't mislabeled product still the #1 reason for recalls?
No, I believe allergens is the #1 reason for well, maybe it's allergen mislabeling.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really tricky whether
Yeah.
that's mislabeling or mismanufacturing.
Correct.
And sometimes we don't know, even as industry professionals.
right.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, everybody. I think we had a pretty good summary today of how to plan for a recall, what some of the resources are through outsourced partners, through compensation partners, et cetera. We looked at an unusual circumstance that's becoming more and more frequent. I wanted to include it, and that's the data breach. And also looking at the allergens, we in the food business and looking at labeling have all faced that as a recall generator for us, if you will. But it's an example of how something that seemed really small a few years ago has really grown and grown and grown. And the Post recall is just a good example. The Post lawsuit that Michelle was talking about is a really good example. We were trying to share a selection of different kinds of crisis that could hit any contact center and give you some food for thought. Tomorrow we will go into more detail on how to plan your strategies, what kinds of communications to write, and also how to train your organization and get the culture thinking around it. I can tell you from a firsthand experience, when I was at Armor Dial, we had quite a few recalls, probably 6 or 7 during the 15 years that I was there that my consumer affairs group got involved in. But when I went to Gallo, they had never had a recall before. I was the person with the most seniority and skill on recalls. They had never had one. And our first recall was a glass and product recall, and it was millions and millions of dollars. But the shock of that sent ripples through our organization and forced a whole lot of change. And I think that's what happens to a lot of organizations, particularly if they haven't had one in a long time and if they're not up to date on all of these different things. So I do think that your first recall is one of those things that's like, it's a crisis in itself, but being better prepared can help you manage it. I was lucky to be on that team because I had come out of other recalls and my recall experiences. But, you know, I think about other companies that are smaller, particularly a lot of these new startups. They're spending a lot of time and energy trying to get their products launched and everything. And preparation for recall is like the last thing on their mind. So I hope that this gives you guys some good foundation. Tomorrow we will go into everything else about recalls, planning, risk assessment, training, culture, you know, writing for it and so forth. So I hope to see you all back tomorrow. Are there any questions before we leave today that we need to put into the agenda for some time tomorrow to address? Speak up. You don't have to chat.
You guys unmute yourself now.
Unmute yourself. Sorry. I know Chris Drury has gone through something recently with his. I don't know how his experience was or if he'd be interested in sharing any of that, but would this have helped you, Chris?
Yeah, it would have. A lot of learnings, a lot of the things that were spoken about today across all of these segments has been pretty good. The one thing more recently that's been real beneficial to us, and I think Beth touched upon it, is the technology side and being able to direct consumers to things like a bot that can help manage the intake, and it alleviates some of the pressure on the call center itself. So one area that I would certainly encourage people to look at. And I don't mind sharing that experience with anyone that wants to talk about it.
One thing I would like to raise, and that goes back to Kim's presentation earlier today, and that's about some of the documentation. We are going to share out some of those checklists and everything with all of you. But when I worked for Dial Corporation, which was a publicly traded company, one of the things we had to do was a shareholder report on the recalls that we faced every year. So part of my job was to keep all the documentation. So we ended up with like a little 3-ring binder from each type of recall we had. And then we had to write a script at how we wanted to address that for our annual shareholders meetings. And we had to speak to recalls if they were in progress when we had the board calls with the stock exchange and some things like that go on. So for those of you who are in public companies, that's another good reason to keep the good documentation.
Yeah, and from a food standpoint, that's just good practice because of FDA and USDA and managing that process with inspectors and, you know, the main offices of each, regionally speaking.
I do want to pose a question to you, Beth. You raised the issue of what's being tracked, you know, as far as like records and things like that. And I was going to ask you about, did you have a recommendation for whether or not to include it in standard reporting or whether to keep it as a secondary report?
Oh, that's a great question, Marie. You know, I think you have to do both. So you have to include it because it happened, and it happened in that time period that you're looking at. It happened in that quarter or in that year. You also have to be able to pull it out and say, this was the aberration, because if we look, here was the blip, this is what it was the event now, and then the rest of the work has gone back to business as usual. But you absolutely can't pretend it didn't exist. And I think that's really important also for the senior team to acknowledge and understand, and what are those impacts, because there's learning from that and insights from that. And those insights you should be reporting on, and they mean something. And then the experiences mean something. Sometimes there's a positive that comes out of it where you've had an insight and you see this thing happened, but it's learning that you say, you know what, let's put that into business. Let's just do that as a regular practice because it worked well and the consumers responded well, whatever that learning or that insight is. So I think it's important to look at it all the way, always.
Anybody have any other questions? Cindy, is there anything in the chat?
No, it just, I think that we're really well-rounded today. We covered a lot of topics, and our experts being on today and sharing a wealth of information is always helpful. And I'm so glad that you all could join us today for this workshop. I'm really excited for part 2 tomorrow, but I don't know about anybody else, but that time just flew. I can't believe we just did 3 hours, you guys. So that's what great content and interaction will do for you. So thank you to everybody who participated today. We're looking forward to picking this up again tomorrow. If you think of anything else that you want us to try to address, maybe just send me or Maria a note. But otherwise, fantastic job today from our speakers. And thanks again for all the questions and the participation from our audience.
Good job, everyone. Thank you so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, Kim.